Chapter 2683. Phew, Night Rain let out a long breath again. Then, she waved her hand, and several faint green lights shot out, hitting the air about 100 feet away. The thick fog was slowly lifted as the green lights hit it, as if a layer of gauze was being removed. Under the thin veil, there were 4 groups of sword cultivator disciples. These 4 groups of sword cultivator disciples were all dressed in different sword attire. They were scattered near Yiyu, and each group had over 10,000 people. They surrounded Yiyu. "Fellow swordsman knight!" After the thick fog was lifted, a first-grade illusory swordsman standing in front of each group saw Night Rain. He hurriedly flew up and bowed, saying, "It's time for us to contribute to the sword realm, isn't it?" "That's right." Night Rain nodded slightly, but her voice was weak. She said lightly, "Fellow Taoists from the Sword School of Sword Mountain, the Pingli Sword School, the Flowing Wind Sword Village and the Flying Thunder Sword Sect, you've been lying in ambush here for nearly 5 years, so you're very familiar with the cooperation of this sword formation. Now LVGNU has sent a signal, and hundreds of thousands of practitioners from the Taoist sect have fallen into the spirit-devouring formation. Needless to say, the Gold Core practitioners in the formation have been attacked by the spirit-devouring bugs, so they have no time to take care of the Foundation establishment and Qi refining disciples. Those disciples have been confused by LVGNU's deceptive tactic and have been utterly defeated. Now is the time for us to contribute to the sword realm." The leaders of the 4-sword school were 2 men and 2 women. Hearing Night Rain's words, they were excited. Ji Ping, a gray-haired swordsman, bowed and said, "The Sword School of Sword Mountain is a small sect in the sword realm. Under the leadership of fellow swordsman Night Rain, we're able to come out for the sword realm and make such a great contribution. On behalf of more than 10,000 disciples of the Sword School of Sword Mountain, I'd like to thank fellow swordsman Night Rain. If fellow swordsman Night Rain needs any help in the future, we'll do anything for you." "That's right." The emoji of the Pingli Sword School, a middle-aged swordswoman, also smiled and said, "According to LVGNU, it's because of fellow swordsman Night Rain that we have the opportunity to contribute to the sword realm. We're all very grateful to fellow swordsman Night Rain. Haha, it's fine. We are all disciples of the sword domain. If we can do something for the sword domain, so what if we die?" Yiyu said with a faint smile. Flowing Wind Sword Manners Fan Ping became even more charming. She smiled and said, "It's a pity that we've been training with sword friend Night Rain for 5 years, but we've never seen his true face. It's really a pity. There will be opportunities in the future. Our 4 sects only need to remember Night Rain's sword friend's kindness." Flying Thunder Sword Sect Huang Xing was a tall old man. His voice was also extremely loud. "Hee, my grace, you will naturally know in the future." Yiyu's voice grew louder and louder. He waved his hand and said, "Now, my 4 friends, get ready. Tell your disciples to follow the previous formation and prepare to activate the sword origin." "Okay." The 4 of them shouted in unison. They were all abnormally excited. Yes, they were able to participate in the ambush of the 4 directions sword formation with the help of the sword formation. They did not need to fight the Taoist cultivators head-on. This was simply a naked military merit. Needless to say, the Yin-Yang sword formation and the 5 elements sword formation, the disciples of the Kuan sword sect and the Taiha sword sect practiced the Yin-Yang flying sword. They were the best choice to set up the Yin-Yang sword formation. The 3 sword sect and the Cauldron sword sect could also gather the 5 elements flying sword. However, in the sword domain, how could these 2 sects be the only ones who could gather the 5 elements flying sword? The reason why the 2 sword sects were included in the 4 directions sword formation was that they had a good relationship with the Black Phoenix sword sect. As for the Duanshui Villa and the Spirit Devouring formation, they were LV Rochang's own subordinates. Everyone knew that the last formation was to deal with the cultivators who had escaped from the Spirit Devouring formation. Many swordsmen did not believe that those Gold Core cultivators could escape from the siege of thousands of spirit-devouring bugs. The last formation would definitely kill the most enemies among the 4 sword formations, which meant that it would have the greatest military merit. The masters of the four sects had never thought that such a good job would fall on them. After all, they were already the second-rate sword sects in the sword domain, even though they had once been glorious. However, because of the arrangement of this mysterious Yu, the four sword sects were selected. The masters of the four sects were overjoyed and immediately sent out tens of thousands of elites to cooperate with Yu's arrangement. They trained for 5 years. For such a reason, how could Ji Ping and the others not be grateful to Yu? These words were really from the bottom of their hearts. When they heard Night Rain's orders, the four of them shouted loudly and flew into the air above their respective sword faction disciples. With a wave of their hands, sword beams shot into the sky. The nearly 40,000 disciples emitted a faint sword beam as their figures gradually moved. It seemed to be an extremely mysterious trajectory. The 40,000 disciples guarded the surroundings of Night Rain, and each disciple moved within a certain range. 10 disciples formed a group, and formed a trajectory. 100 disciples, 1,000 disciples, and even 10,000 disciples from each sect formed a trajectory. The 40,000 disciples moved around Yu at the same time. As the entire formation rotated, a strange suction force appeared above each disciple's head. Yu's eyes flashed with intense passion. He pointed at the palace guardian insect that stopped in the air. The palace guardian insect's body shone brightly, and it strangely moved in the air like a real palace guardian insect. Seeing the palace guardian insect crawl to the top of Yu's head, Yu suddenly raised his head and opened his mouth. A faint green light shot into the air like a sharp sword and rushed into the palace guardian insect's body. "Gee!" the palace guardian insect cried out in alarm. Its one eye shot out tens of thousands of green light beams into the sky like a fountain. Then, it scattered back down. The place where the green light landed was where the suction force came from. It was the top of each disciple's head. "Kill!" Yi roared. The sword light around the 40,000 disciples flashed. The sword origin in their bodies was ready to come out. However, just as the sword origin was about to leave him, the green light beams immediately penetrated the disciples' heads. Every disciple's body was immediately covered by a layer of green light. The sword origin was immediately imprisoned in the disciples' bodies. Pun pun pun! A series of light explosions rang out continuously, lasting for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Every light explosion was a disciple's sword origin surging and his body exploding. After every light explosion, the green light entered his flesh and merged with his sword origin. "Sword friend Yi, what is going on?" Ji Ping and the others were shocked and hurriedly shouted. "Ha ha ha!" Yi raised his head and laughed happily. He said, "Didn't you all want to contribute to Sword Realm? Weren't you all not afraid of being crushed? Now is the time for you all to sacrifice your lives for Sword Realm." But... Ji Ping was at a loss for words. He didn't know how to ask. "You, who are you? Why do you have to choose our 4 sword sects?" Li Moji and Fan Ping, the 2 swordsmen, were the most meticulous. They almost shouted in unison. At this moment, Ji Ping and the others suddenly understood that the 4th sword formation of the 4-sword formation was definitely not an ordinary sword formation. It was definitely an extremely sinister sword formation. Looking at the stance of their disciples, it was most likely a sinister sword formation that would exchange their lives for theirs. It was Yu, a mysterious person that they had never seen before, who sent the 40,000 disciples of the 4 sects into this pit of fire. However, why would this mysterious Yu treat the disciples of the 4 sects like this? Could it be that the 4 sects also had a grudge against him? In the blink of an eye, Ji Ping and the others had racked their brains countless times. It was as if they had racked their brains but still couldn't find a swordsman who had such a deep grudge against their sword sect. "Ha ha ha! Didn't you all say that you wanted to see my true appearance?" Yi laughed loudly. He stretched out his hand and pulled down his sword armor. He said, "I will now fulfill your last wish." Under the sword armor was an extremely handsome man. His eyebrows were sword-like and his nose was like a hanging gallbladder. He didn't seem to have any special features. Ji Ping and the others looked at him again and again. They couldn't remember anything at all. They couldn't help but smile bitterly at each other. What? Can't you see who I am? Yi Yu's eyes were filled with eagerness. His tone was much more cheerful than before. Ji Ping and the others smiled bitterly and then sneered. I don't care what grudges you have with our 4 sections. However, you used the excuse of setting up the sword formation to avenge your personal grudge. You are the one that we hate the most in the Battle of Sword Domain. Today, we will fight to the death with you. We don't believe that the 4 illusory swordsmen can't escape from your hands. When we have a chance to live, we will find Lu Ruochang and Lu Jianyu and ask her to uphold justice for us. Ha! Seeing that the 4 illusory swordsmen were overflowing with sword light, the flying swords in their bodies were about to fly out. Yi Yu gently pointed his hand. 4 green rays of light fell from the top of the 4 people's heads. The green threads that were connected to their heads trembled rapidly. The 4 people's bodies were completely imprisoned by the green light, unable to move at all. Lu Jianyu? Are you still fantasizing about finding Lu Ruochang? How can this Yi let you all return alive? Yi Yu said cheerfully. Besides, even if you survive, even if people suspect that more than 40,000 people from your 4 sects died, will Lu Ruochang blame me? What? Ji Ping and the others struggled with all their might. However, their sword origin was completely imprisoned by the green light. They couldn't move at all. They couldn't help but despair in their hearts. When they heard Yi Yu's words, they were immediately shocked. The feeling of being toyed with filled their hearts uncontrollably. You have colluded with Lu Ruochang? Fan Ping couldn't help but cry out. What do you mean by colluding? Yi Yu sneered. This is the promise that Lu Jianyu gave me. It is also the price for me to kill hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators. Using 40,000 disciples of your 4 sword sect to exchange for the lives of hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators. Don't you think it's an extremely good deal? -11. Chapter 2684. Shut up! Huang Xing said angrily. Since you think it's worth it, why don't you let your sword's gate come here to die? Yu Yu's face twitched slightly, but there was a trace of reluctance in his eyes. He said faintly, Yes, you all said that you could give up your lives for the sword domain, but now that it's come to this, you all go back on your words. We'd rather do that, but we don't want to die in your hands for no reason, Huang Xing shouted. However, Yi Yu ignored him and only muttered, As long as you're a human, regardless of whether you're a cultivator or a swordsman, you all have the desire to live. However, some people don't want this chance to live and choose death for the sake of others. But what about the others? They're not grateful to these people, and after making use of them, they wantonly killed their descendants. The heavenly Tao is fair. What are you talking about? Li Moji saw Yi Yu's crazy look and was very scared. He said anxiously, 40,000 of our Sword's Gate disciples have already fallen. Do you still want to live? Yi Yu looked up at the 4 of them and sneered. Not just you, the foundations of your Sword's Gate in the Sword Domain. After the battle here, I'll kill you all. This is something that LV Ruochang has already agreed to. Only by completely wiping out all 4 of your clans will I be able to reveal my true face in broad daylight. Who are you? Why do you have such a deep hatred for our Sword's Gate? Ji Ping's face twitched. Before death, the desire to know the answer was incomparably huge. Didn't you just say it? You want my Sword's Gate to come here to die? Yi Yu said faintly. My Sword's Gate has already done it 8,000 years ago. 8,000 years? Ji Ping was stunned, as if he couldn't remember anything. You're a remnant of the Flying Dragon Sword Gate? Huang Xing suddenly remembered something and exclaimed. Ha! Not bad, there's actually someone who knows about my Flying Dragon Sword Gate. Yi Yu waved his hand, and an orange-yellow sword light soared into the sky. With a roar, a dragon-shaped sword intent flashed out from the sword light, and an enormous and indescribable aura spread out from the dragon-shaped sword, enveloping an area of several hundred feet. Flying Dragon Sword Sect, it really is the Flying Dragon Sword Sect, Ji Ping muttered in a daze. That's right. Since you know that I, Yi, am a disciple of the Flying Dragon Sword sect, you should know why I, Yi, am here, right? Yi said coldly. 8,000 years ago, your four sects took advantage of the fact that my Flying Dragon Sword sect's vitality was greatly damaged to invade my dragon platform and exterminate my descendants. Tell me, should I not take revenge today? Sword friend Yi, Huang Xing said helplessly. That was 8,000 years ago. What does it have to do with us? It's better to squash enmity than to keep it alive. You've killed tens of thousands of disciples from our four sects, so you should have avenged your Flying Dragon Sword sect, right? The four of us don't plan on going back alive. The other disciples of our four sects are even more innocent. Thousands of years ago, the disciples of my Flying Dragon Sword sect who were stationed at the dragon platform were not innocent. When your four sects annihilated my Flying Dragon Sword sect that day, did you ever consider that you were innocent? Yi said coldly. Now you're just complaining. How can you be innocent? Furthermore, the Sword Region Dragon platform belongs to my Flying Dragon Sword sect. You've occupied it for thousands of years. Shouldn't you leave? Shouldn't you pay the price? Yi lifted his eyes to look towards the east as he spoke. The sounds of fighting were already faintly discernible. He snorted from his nose and said, This Yi is too lazy to say anything more to all of you. This Yi is only telling all of you this because all of you have been so respectful towards this Yi over the past 5 years. All of you should hurry over. The credit of killing hundreds of thousands of Dao sect disciples is waiting for this Yi to share with everyone. Following that, Yi raised his hand and the four of them were surrounded by a green light. The four of them didn't even have time to make a sound before they turned into blood stains. These 4 blood stains were the same as the other 40,000 blood stains. Although they no longer had any vitality, they were still spinning like before. Rise! Yi roared. He opened his mouth and a faint green light was shot at the palace guarding bug. The palace guarding bug moved slightly, and the tens of thousands of green threads trembled at the same time. Phantoms emerged from the blood stains. They were the vengeful spirits of the 40,000 swordsmen from the 4 sects. Once these vengeful spirits were drawn out, a vicious aura immediately rushed out. This vicious aura gathered together, and even dispersed the thick fog. Ha! Yi laughed. He pointed his hand and the tens of thousands of green threads flew out and landed on the tens of thousands of blood stains. The blood stains boiled and countless bubbles emerged from the blood stains. Streaks of bloody light followed the green threads and rushed into the palace guarding bug. The blood stains quickly shrank. Soon, all of the blood stains disappeared. The palace guarding bug became half the size of a person, and its body emitted a red and dark green light. Squeak! The palace guarding bug raised its head and made a sound. The sound was not right, but the invisible wave spread far away. As the wave swept across, the vengeful spirits slowly rushed out from the ground of the sword tomb one after another. Go! Yi flew up and landed on the palace guarding insect's body. The palace guarding insect carried Yi and quickly crawled through the air. Tens of thousands of vengeful spirits surged toward the east like a tide, which was where the Dao sect cultivators were charging from. Within a radius of several miles around Yi, even more vengeful spirits surged forth like a thin tide and gathered toward the battlefield. On the battlefield, 3 spirit-swallowing bugs quietly turned into 3 black lines and rushed to the left of Li Zongbao and the others. Li Zongbao and the others had already noticed it. Humph! Li Zongbao sneered. He waved his hand and the immortal piercing whip hit the spirit-swallowing bugs again. But something unexpected happened. This time, the spirit-swallowing bugs were not knocked away like before. Instead, they opened their mouths and bit the light of the immortal piercing whip and started to chew it. Ah! Spirit-swallowing bugs! Li Zongbao was shocked. He hurriedly activated his Dharma power, and the light of the immortal piercing whip shone brightly. He wanted to knock the spirit-swallowing bugs away. But as soon as he moved, the 2 spirit-swallowing bugs that were flying toward Xiao Mao and Fairy Hong Xiao were immediately attracted by the light of the immortal piercing whip and rushed toward Li Zongbao. Li Zongbao hurriedly activated his flying skill to escape, but he was not as fast as the spirit-swallowing bugs. In a moment, 2 spirit-swallowing bugs caught up with him and bit the light of the immortal piercing whip. What should I do now? Li Zongbao had always treated the immortal piercing whip as his treasure. When he saw the 3 spirit-swallowing bugs devouring the light of the whip, he knew that in a moment, his whip would be turned into ordinary iron like Li Jijia's flying sword. He was extremely anxious. At this time, Fairy Hong Xia and Xiao Mao also flew over. Although they did not dare to get too close, they were not too far away. But they were helpless when they saw the 3 spirit-swallowing bugs. Should we use the congenital primordial water? Fairy Hong Xia hesitated and gritted her teeth. However, the congenital primordial water was activated by the Ice Phoenix celestial body. Although the celestial body did not need to be released, the fluctuation of the celestial body, was it spiritual energy? Fairy Hong Xia could not be sure. Moreover, the celestial body was more than 100 feet long. It was far more attractive to the spirit-swallowing bugs than ordinary cultivators. Fairy Hong Xia was afraid that she would become the target of the spirit-swallowing bugs the moment she released the Ice Phoenix celestial body. The consequences would be worse than Li Zongbao losing the immortal piercing whip. Attack! Li Zongbao helplessly used his Dharma incantation, such as the fireball skill and the confinement skill, one after another. Unfortunately, none of them were effective. The light of the immortal piercing whip gradually disappeared in the mouths of the spirit-swallowing bugs. Forget it! Li Zongbao shook his hand and was about to throw away the immortal piercing whip. But at this time, the spirit-swallowing bugs flew up again and headed for Li Zongbao's arm. Obviously, they had followed the trajectory of Li Zongbao's Dharma power. Oh no! Li Zongbao also saw Qi Ming and Li Jijia being killed. How could he not know the power of the spirit-swallowing bugs? He hurriedly flew up. Just as before, Li Zongbao had only flown a few feet when the spirit-swallowing bugs were already behind him. Li Zongbao trembled with fear and could only activate the Dharma power in his body, regardless of whether it would attract more spirit-swallowing bugs. At this critical moment, there was a loud buzzing sound. In the sky, about 1,000 feet behind Hung Hun, a faint light flashed. Dozens of strong hurricanes appeared and a huge palm gradually formed. It was unknown which middle-stage gold core cultivator could not resist the attack of the spirit-swallowing bugs and could not help but use the talisman given by his sect. The hand of the nascent soul had already been activated. The powerful confinement skill firmly held the dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs surrounding the cultivator. However, many of the spirit-swallowing bugs around the cultivator were attracted by the spiritual power of the talisman. They abandoned their targets and flew toward the hand of the nascent soul. The 3 spirit-swallowing bugs on Li Zongbao's back were also attracted by the talisman. They turned their heads and flew toward the hand of the nascent soul, ignoring Li Zongbao. I was lucky! Li Zongbao's back was sweating. He could not help but whisper. He lowered his head and looked at the immortal piercing whip in his hand, which had lost its brilliance. He regretfully and reluctantly put it into his storage bag. Oh no, it's Uncle Liang Mingfu from the Nanming sect! Fairy Hong Xia's eyes were sharp. She had already seen the gold core cultivator using the hand of the nascent soul. She could not help but cry out. Sure enough, Liang Mingfu made an incantation. The hand of the nascent soul clenched fiercely. When the hand opened, the dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs that were caught fell from the sky. However, after falling for a few feet, 2 or 3 of them flapped their wings and flew up again. The other 10 spirit-swallowing bugs fell with the wind and did not fly up again. Seeing this, Liang Mingfu's face lit up. However, his joy only flashed for a moment before it froze on his face. Within 100 feet, dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs were attracted by the spiritual qi of the nascent soul's talisman. They flew toward the hand. -11. Chapter 2685. Damn it! Liang Mingfu shouted and was about to cast another spell. But at this time, the dozens of black lines had flown to the big hand, and dozens of black spots appeared on the big hand like spots. Seal! Liang Mingfu dared not hesitate. His Dharma power surged, and the big hand emitted a faint light again, driving all the spirit-swallowing bugs away from the big hand. When Liang Mingfu was about to control the big hand to catch the spirit-swallowing bugs, they opened their sharp teeth again and started to chew the light of the Yuan Ying's hand. "You're courting death!" Liang Mingfu snorted and slowly grabbed the spirit-swallowing bugs with his big hand again. "Uncle Liang, watch out!" Li Zongbao's voice was very loud. "Oh?" Liang Mingfu was in danger and hurriedly released his divine thought. Sure enough, just behind him, dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs scattered and flew towards him. At this time, they were less than 3 feet away from him. How can these spirit-swallowing bugs be so cunning? Liang Mingfu was shocked. He moved quickly and the Yuan Ying's hand smashed towards the spirit-swallowing bugs again. Buzz, the spirit-swallowing bugs were almost unable to move under the restriction of the Yuan Ying's hand. Suddenly, the big hand made a deafening sound. "Damn it!" Liang Mingfu heard it, and his face changed greatly. Before he could do anything, boom! With another loud sound, the Yuan Ying's hand suddenly collapsed in the air and turned into a broken talisman again, falling slowly. The spirit-swallowing bugs that had swallowed the Yuan Ying's hand swarmed towards Liang Mingfu like a swarm of bees. Run! Liang Mingfu only had one thought in his mind, and his body suddenly swayed. Pa! Just as Liang Mingfu flew several meters away, a spirit-swallowing bug strangely rushed towards him from the side. Liang Mingfu waved his hand, and 2 more spirit-swallowing bugs appeared on his left side. Liang Mingfu's heart sank. When he just raised his other hand, buzz, as if thousands of bees were dancing around his ears, Liang Mingfu was very anxious. He scanned with his divine thought, and his face turned pale. He saw that the dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs had already landed on his back and were devouring his protective golden light. Oh no! Without hesitation, Liang Mingfu made a prompt decision to cast an incantation before the protective golden light was extinguished. Boom! With a loud bang, the space within a radius of hundreds of feet shook violently. Countless airwaves rushed in all directions from here, and the dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs were also pushed more than 1,000 feet away. That was not all. Within 100 zhang of Liang Mingfu, there were several golden core cultivators and quite a few foundation establishment disciples. The golden core cultivators were still able to escape in a panic, but the foundation establishment disciples were miserable. Although they tried their best to escape, they were still unable to escape the impact of the golden core explosion. Most of them died. The pitiful thing was that instead of dying in the mouth of the spirit-swallowing bugs, they were dragged to the grave by their own teachers. For a moment, the area within 1,000 feet of where Liang Mingfu had exploded was completely empty. How terrifying! Xiao Mao exclaimed in shock when he saw how powerful Liang Mingfu's self-destruction was. Li Zongbao, Fairy Hongxia, and Xiao Mao were originally quite a distance away from Liang Mingfu. After Liang Mingfu flew in the opposite direction, they were at the edge of the 1,000 feet radius. When Liang Mingfu self-destructed, they hurriedly dodged and did not suffer much damage. That's amazing! Unlike Xiao Mao, Fairy Hongxia saw that after Liang Mingfu's self-destruction, only half of the spirit-swallowing bugs fell to the air. The other half flapped their wings again and rushed toward the nearby golden core cultivators. Master, Li Zongbao was shocked again. Heng Zhao was very close to Liang Mingfu, so he was the first to bear the brunt of the self-destruction. When he hurriedly dodged, more spirit-swallowing bugs were pushed to his side by the airwaves. Unfortunately, this wasn't the most important thing. Right at this moment, countless sword cries resounded from beneath the cultivators, and tens of thousands of enormous flying swords charged straight out from the ground. Sword light flickered, and sword chi crisscrossed. It was precisely the swordsman that Lu Ruochang had hidden within the spirit-devouring grand formation that had attacked at the same time. Previously, only the spirit-swallowing bugs were wreaking havoc in the soul-devouring formation. Under the control of Fan Ke Yuan's pagoda, their main targets were the cultivators at the golden core stage. The foundation establishment, and chi-refining disciples were only disturbed by the so-called gold-swallowing bugs and earth-swallowing bugs. Of course, many disciples were killed by the real spirit-swallowing bugs, and their corpses were everywhere. Now, the sword formation showed its sharp teeth again. Its target was the Foundation establishment disciples who had lost their fighting spirit. Li Zongbao wanted to help his master, but the huge sword was condensed by many sword lights. Obviously, it was the joint attack of a group of sword cultivators. How could Li Zongbao be distracted? He hurriedly clapped his hands and habitually took out the Immortal piercing whip. However, the Immortal piercing whip had been destroyed by the spirit-swallowing bugs. How could it be useful? Li Zongbao sighed and hurriedly looked for other magic weapons. Fortunately, Xiao Mao and Fairy Hong Xiao were beside him. The two of them temporarily protected Li Zongbao. The huge sword of the soul-devouring formation was born. As the sword chi surged, hundreds of spirit-swallowing bugs were attracted to it. However, in the sky, the fluctuations of the pagoda suddenly intensified. The spirit-swallowing bugs only hesitated for a moment before they rushed towards the golden core stage cultivators again. Now, there were less than 160,000 Dao sect cultivators left. They had long been reduced to mere chickens and pottery dogs. There was no way they could form an army. During the first two battles, they could still form simple formations to fight against the giant sword. Now, they could only rely on their instincts to flee in all directions. Many disciples had even died at the hands of other cultivators. For a moment, screams rang out everywhere. In the flashing sword lights, it was like purgatory. Not only that. Under the attack of the spirit-swallowing bugs, more and more golden core stage cultivators used their final killing moves. One by one, protective talismans were used. Although these nascent soul stage cultivators could kill some of the spirit-swallowing bugs, once they used their talismans, they attracted more spirit-swallowing bugs. It was tantamount to drinking poison to quench thirst. In just a short time, more than 10 golden core stage cultivators died. Among them, there were several golden core stage elders in the conference hall. Ko Xiangling of the Yongyi sect, Zhu Junwei of the Cool Breeze Valley, Yuan Yiguang of the Blue Li sect, and Qing Zi of the Mo Sang Mountain were all cultivators in the early stage of golden core stage. They had been injured outside the sword tomb. Although they had recuperated for a while, how could they protect themselves under the attack of the spirit-swallowing bugs? One by one, the spirit-swallowing bugs rushed into their bodies and swallowed their golden cores. Hua Ping from the blazing fire mountain was proficient in the art of controlling fire. Wisps of flame flew to the left and right from time to time, luring the spirit-swallowing bugs to fly to the left and right. At the same time, she also wandered on the edge of the cliff of death. Huang Feng from the exotic beast sect was also strange. He had a strange beast that looked like a green snake coiled around his finger. From time to time, he would make a sharp hissing sound from his mouth, which made the besieging spirit-swallowing bugs a little afraid of him. However, these cultivators in the early stage of golden core stage were just on the verge of death. They would die if they didn't do anything. Heng Ming and other cultivators in the middle stage of golden core stage were still trying their best to hold on. When they heard the sound of self-explosion from time to time, they felt bitter in their hearts. They knew that the Taoism sect cultivators were really defeated in this battle. However, they still had a little hope in their hearts. They wanted to find a chance to escape from this spirit-swallowing formation. Woo! Like a gust of cold wind, a chill appeared on Heng Ming's face. Oh! Heng Ming was slightly stunned. He was a cultivator in the golden core stage. Usually, he was immune to cold and heat. How could he feel the cold wind at will? Not to mention that he was fighting hard against the spirit-swallowing bugs. Heng Ming couldn't help looking around. When he looked around, he felt a chill in his heart. As far as the eye could see, there was a flash of sword light. Outside the sword light, there was a thick fog. Within the fog, wisps of dark green were faintly discernible. At the same time, there were strange cries of ghosts and howls of wolves coming from within the fog. Obviously, the fog had been there for a long time, but Heng Ming didn't notice it. All the disciples in the Foundation establishment stage, and the chi refining stage who had escaped earlier were forced back by the fog. Although these disciples activated their flying talismans and flying skills, it was obvious that their Dharma power had been exhausted. From time to time, some disciples were infected by the fog. However, those who were sprayed by the fog all fell from the sky without making a sound and no longer moved. Hung Ning really sucked in a breath of cold air. His heart was cold, and an unparalleled sense of despair rose in his heart. LV Ruochang had really put in a lot of effort in this square sword formation. He had used all his methods. The yin-yang sword formation killed cultivators in the middle stage of the foundation establishment stage and below. The 5 elements sword formation killed cultivators in the golden core stage and above, and the spirit swallowing bugs killed cultivators in the golden core stage and above. As for the remaining cultivators, they were killed by this mysterious fog. From the moment the hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators fell into the square sword formation, their fates had already been decided by the swordsmen of the Hun Kingdom. LV Ruochang would not let a single cultivator fly out of this sword formation, no matter if it was chi refining, foundation establishment, or golden core. There are dozens of sects in the Dao sect. Why are there no senior brothers in the later stage of the golden core stage participating in this battle? At this moment, Hun Ning suddenly thought of LV Ruochang's question. Could it be that the Dao sect is bound to lose in this battle of Dao cultivators? Do the teachers of each sect already know? Or is there another reason? Hun Ning naturally did not have an answer to this question. Looking at the fog flashing with green light, Hun Ning had already lost the courage to fight. He also did not have the strength to resist the attacks of dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs. Even if a senior brother in the later stage of the golden core stage came, he would not have a second chance of survival. At this moment, in the thick fog, a green shadow gradually became clear. It was the palace-guarding bug, which had already become 10 feet long. This palace-guarding bug's body was strangely distorted and the green light was flickering rapidly. On the palace-guarding bug's back, Night Rain, who was dressed in black, gradually appeared. -11. Chapter 2686. Soul Armament. Hung Feng's body trembled uncontrollably as he stared at the beetle. Ever since he took charge of the council hall, he had read up on many of the previous battles in the council hall. He had even read up on some of the information and records from Sky Patrol City. Thus, he had some understanding of the situation in the Huan Kingdom. Now that he saw the green glow of the beetle, which was as agile as a spirit beast, how could he not know that it was a soul armament? Lu Ruochang has gone mad. In order to win this war, he actually lured soul cultivators into the Huan Kingdom. Heng Ji turned pale with fright. But when he saw Yu Yu's true face, he was a bit surprised. This soul warrior seems to be different from what is recorded in the ancient records. Master. Li Zhongbao's voice sounded distant. Hung Feng was startled again. When he looked again, a spirit-devouring bug had already climbed onto his protective golden light. Forget it, everything is about to end. Heng Ju raised his head and looked over. Li Zhongbao, Fairy Hong Xia and the rest were trying their best to resist the sword light. Seeing his proud disciple like this, Heng Ju felt gratified. Perhaps this kind of life is what Zhongbao should have. But I won't be able to see it. Seeing a spirit-devouring bug bite through Heng Feng's protective golden light without any resistance, Li Zhongbao's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. At this critical moment, when all the Dao sect cultivators were about to be wiped out, an indescribable pressure surged from the west of the sword formation like a rising tide. This pressure was very weak in the eyes of Heng Ning and the rest, but it was simple, tenacious, and peculiar. This pressure was like a rising tide, instantly enveloping the great spirit-devouring formation and even surging toward the east. Following which, a huge sealing force descended from the sky, completely enveloping the entire four-direction sword array. This sealing force was so strong that all the cultivators, swordsmen, and even the spirit-devouring bugs stopped in their tracks. Ah! Someone is condensing their core! When Hengjiu felt this pressure, he immediately knew that it was the pressure of a golden core cultivator. Just like Yutong, when the sealing force appeared, Hengjiu also understood that it was the celestial phenomenon of a cultivator's breakthrough. What a pity! Hung Feng felt a trace of regret. This late-stage foundation establishment disciple is not condensing his core at the right time. If it was a few days earlier, he would have succeeded. Now that he's condensing his core here, there are spirit-devouring bugs, swordsmen, and even soul warriors. How could he succeed? However, the power of imprisonment was not what Heng Zhao had imagined. It grew stronger and stronger, and everyone was trapped in it. Especially those spirit-swallowing bugs, they were tightly confined and could not move at all. Like Yutong, Heng Feng's heart was in turmoil. He was a middle-stage golden core disciple of the Utopia faction, so he was very clear about the details of a late-stage golden core cultivator's pregnancy. He knew better than Yutong about the signs of a late-stage golden core cultivator's pregnancy. This sealing force could only be produced by a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator's pregnancy. It was absolutely impossible for a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator to condense his core. Which senior brother is actually in the sword catacomb? Hung Feng was almost stunned. No cultivator, no matter if it was the state of Shi, the state of Meng, or the state of Lian, with any common sense, would conceive a baby in the sword catacomb. However, Hung Feng was only stunned for a moment. Then, a thought of escaping from death appeared in his mind. His previously dead vitality sprouted like a bud. Hung Feng knew that in the early years, the Taoism sect cultivators who were trapped in the sword formation relied on several late-stage golden core cultivators to conceive a baby. From there, they won a chance of survival and defeated the swordsmen who were already confident of victory. Now, wasn't this the Taoism sect cultivators repeating the same trick? Wasn't this the best opportunity for them to kill the spirit-swallowing bugs and escape? Almost without thinking, Hung Feng reached out his hand and took out the nascent soul talisman with difficulty from his storage bag. Then, he activated the Dharma power in his body with difficulty. Buzz! With a flash of brilliance, the nascent soul hand slowly expanded. In this confinement that was comparable to that of a pregnant baby, the nascent soul hand could still be activated. Since Hung Feng had such a thought, De Sun, Xiong Huasong, and the others naturally had the same idea. All the golden core cultivators in the conference hall who had talismans activated their nascent soul hands. Although there were hundreds or even thousands of spirit-swallowing bugs, they were different from the golden core cultivators in this confinement phenomenon. They trembled very much, as if they were extremely afraid. The fluctuations of the pagoda in the sky were also disturbed by this confinement force. The spirit-swallowing bugs were no longer under control. They froze in midair, and the nascent soul hands grabbed them and crushed them to death. Damn it! What? Why is it a pregnant baby again? Outside the spirit-swallowing formation, Elviruochang and the others were also affected by this confinement force. Their expressions changed greatly. Elviruochang almost stomped his feet in midair and said hatefully, Which golden core cultivator is pregnant? Among the hundreds of thousands of cultivators in the Taoist sect, there is no disciple in the later stage of golden core, right? Seeing that the confinement force was getting stronger, Elviruochang was so angry that his whole body trembled. Boom! A huge explosion came from the spirit-swallowing formation in the distance. A burst of yellow brilliance shot up into the sky and shook the confinement force. Fan Ming Yuan, Fan Jianyu. Elviruochang saw this and his expression changed again. Inside the spirit-devouring formation, yellow light soared into the sky, and the area within a radius of several thousand feet was hit by a powerful wave of air. The restrictive force inside the formation was shattered by the explosion of the pagoda that Fan Kuyuan had turned into. The remaining hundreds of spirit-devouring bugs once again had blood-red light in their eyes, and they madly charged toward the nascent soul hands of Hung Feng and the others. This time, the spirit-swallowing bugs were even more powerful. In a moment, the nascent soul hands were devoured. The hope that the Taoist sect cultivators had just had was snuffed out again. Fan Jianyu. Elvira Chang looked up at the sky and said sorrowfully, "The warriors of the Sword region will never forget your contributions." Then, he urged the sword light under his feet to fly slowly in the confinement force. He said coldly, "Even if there is a golden core cultivator in the later stage of golden core, so what? Not to mention this spirit-swallowing formation, even my final killing move is not something that a pregnant Tian Zhao can defeat." However, before Elvira Chang could fly more than 10 feet, strong hurricanes were set off in the space enveloped by the confinement force. The center of these hurricanes was a small virtual point. As these hurricanes grew stronger, the virtual point gradually revealed a shiny silver-white light spot. Once this light spot appeared, it immediately condensed and grew larger. In a moment, it grew to the size of a thumb, then a fist, and finally a dipper. This dipper was surrounded by a huge whirlpool. The golden spiritual chi of heaven and earth in the whirlpool was constantly gathering, forming many pearls. The golden spiritual chi of heaven and earth in the entire square sword formation was swept away and turned into these crystals. For a moment, the radiance of the magic tools and magic treasures on the battlefield dimmed, and the sword light gradually disappeared. Some cultivators who had exhausted their magic power couldn't even stand steadily in the air, and actually fell from the sky. Of course, this situation only stagnated for a moment. Gusts of wind swept up in the formation again. The spiritual chi of heaven and earth, and sword chi in other parts of the sword tomb surged toward the formation again. Elvira Chang was stunned. Hun Ting was even more stunned. But while Hun Ting was stunned, he was also pleasantly surprised. This was because the spirit-swallowing bugs attacking the nascent soul hands were obviously attracted by the vast amount of golden spiritual chi of heaven and earth. They did not care about the hands of the nascent soul and the golden core cultivators. Thousands of spirit-swallowing bugs, whether real or fake, rushed toward the huge crystal. The spirit-swallowing formation was no longer effective. This does not seem to be a pregnant senior brother at the peak of the later stage of golden core. A pregnant senior brother shouldn't have crystals. Hun Ting almost stretched out a hand from his throat. Only pure spirit tide can form a nascent soul, right? But if it is not a pregnant senior brother, how can there be such a huge crystal? Perhaps this senior brother's nascent soul is different from that of ordinary cultivators. This could only be Hun Ting's guess. Quick! After Elvira Chang recovered from his shock, he did not have time to care about the abnormality of the pregnant senior brother. He cried out to the group of third-grade illusory swordsmen. "Let's hurry and find the location of this senior brother's nascent soul before he is pregnant. From the looks of it, he is not far away. Maybe we can take the opportunity to kill him. But what about the golden core cultivators in the spirit-swallowing formation?" Ruoling was a little weak, but she still asked. "It is very difficult to kill a nascent soul. Why don't we take the opportunity to kill the rest of the Tao sect disciples?" Elvira Chang said confidently. "I have a soul-killing formation outside the spirit-swallowing formation. Even if there is a pregnant senior brother." As he spoke, a rumbling sound of thunder rang out from the sky above the sword catacomb. Within 100 miles of the sky, the rolling dark clouds surged rapidly, and faintly discernible golden threads danced in the dark clouds. A vast killing intent, through the power of imprisonment, filled the space between heaven and earth. Elvira Chang sensed the killing intent of this heavenly thunder. How could he not know that this was the nemesis of spirit warriors? A mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth, and he was practically dispirited in midair. "Junior sister LV!" Ruoling was shocked and hurriedly flew forward to support Elvira Chang. Elvira Chang's eyes were lifeless, like a dead fish. He stared straight at the sky and muttered, "In the sword catacomb where lightning does not occur, when will there be heavenly thunder? This cultivator who is pregnant in the sword catacomb, who is this expert? Alas, since LV Heshing was born. Could it be that this is what she said? That I was too clever in my calculations, and in the end I ruined Qingqing's life? Elvira-chung was sad. Could it be that I can only fail at the last minute? This is predestined. -11. Chapter 2687. Just as Elvira-chung expected, outside the spirit-devouring formation, the rolling fog was still moving forward slowly and steadily, although it was affected by the confinement force. Although the palace-guarding bug and Yu could not fly in the air, they had already landed on the ground, but they were still crawling forward step by step. However, sooner or later they would meet the Taoist sect cultivators, and these cultivators would be killed by Yu's soul-destroying formation. Heng Zhao and the others were ready for the final battle. However, when the heavenly thunder broke through the confinement formation, Yu's face changed greatly. Others did not know, but he saw clearly through the soul-destroying formation. All the vengeful souls were struggling painfully in the heavenly thunder, and many of them had turned into white smoke and disappeared. More powerful vengeful souls, attracted by the soul-destroying formation, were fleeing in panic. Yu looked at the sky, and he was also confused. But just as he was confused, the heavenly thunder in the sky became more intense. The golden light was shining, and it slowly gathered in a place in the west. Oh no! In the golden light, the heavenly thunder became more and more powerful. Yu's soul-destroying formation trembled in fear, and the green light around it gradually dimmed. Yu complained secretly and hurriedly recited the soul incantation, and the soul-destroying formation shrank rapidly. When the soul-destroying formation was restored, Yu looked at the 40,000 vengeful souls of the Sword Mountain and the 4 sword schools reluctantly. He wanted to activate the soul-destroying formation to collect them, but these vengeful souls were trapped in a quagmire under the heavenly thunder. No matter how Yu activated the soul-destroying formation, he could not take any vengeful souls away from the heavenly thunder. Without the vengeful souls, how could Yu dare to face the golden core cultivators? Yu's figure slowly disappeared as he prepared to leave. However, Yu's figure flickered several times, but he just couldn't disappear. Under the might of the heavenly lightning, his soul cultivation movement technique was also affected. Kill, Heng Zhao and the others were killing the spirit-devouring bugs while observing Yu. They saw Yu collect the soul-destroying formation, and his figure flickered several times, and then he turned around and left. How could they not know that he had given up the soul-destroying formation? Overjoyed, he hurriedly circulated his true essence to fight against the binding force while killing the swordsman. Relying on the strength of a single person to break Lu Ruochang's plan of several years, relying on the strength of a single person to save hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators from certain death. Other than Xiaohua, who was preparing to condense his core in the Brahma Gold Palace, in this dawn-rain continent, who else could it be? However, Xiaohua's situation was not as simple as Heng Zhao and Elvira-chung thought. Xiaohua originally wanted to rely on his advanced celestial phenomenon restriction to kill Yutong, but just as he was about to make a move, a tearing pain suddenly appeared in his lower dantian, as if his entire dantian was about to be torn apart. When his divine sense sank into his lower dantian, he was unconsciously scared out of his wits. He saw a light purple thing slowly rotating between his 2 lightning cores. A huge suction force came from this light purple thing. This suction force rushed into his chi refining and foundation establishment meridians. This situation was originally recorded in Zhen Qing's experience of condensing one's core. Other than the 2 lightning cores, everything else was roughly the same. However, what caused Xiaohua to turn pale with fright was the suction force generated by the core condensation. This suction force was divided into 2, each containing the power of the heavenly Tao. The power of the heavenly Tao in these 2 suction forces was different according to the Tao of Yin and Yang. One was Yang, the other was Yin. They were separately sucked into his 2 meridians. If it was an ordinary cultivator who condensed their core, the Yin and Yang suction forces would be completely balanced. Because of the different Yin and Yang attributes, the solidified true essence absorbed would produce a fusion of Yin and Yang, which would allow the true essence to condense into a golden core in the dantian. But at this moment, the suction force in Xiaohua's 2 meridians was completely different. The suction force in the qi refining meridians was more than 40% greater than the suction force in the foundation establishment meridians. This enormous suction force twisted Xiaohua's lower dantian. This kind of heart-tearing and lung-splitting pain was more severe than any kind of needle pricking. Moreover, this suction force had already penetrated deep into his meridians. The unbalanced power twisted all the meridians in Xiaohua's body. Seeing this situation, Xiaohua understood. If it was an ordinary core condensation, then he would have taken the dry separation pill. The dry separation pill could accelerate the solidification of the true essence flowing within the meridians. This solidified true essence would be sent into the light purple area by the suction force, and the golden core that countless foundation establishment cultivators yearned for day and night would condense there. However, would Xiaohua dare to take the dry separation pill now? His two suction forces were completely unbalanced. Not to mention whether or not it would affect the two meridians, even the amount of true essence used to condense the golden core would be different because of the difference in the yin and yang suction forces. And with different amounts of yin and yang true essence, could it condense into a complete golden core? Xiaohua could almost think of the answer with his heel. It was absolutely impossible. The only result of doing this was that the yang true essence would be greater than the yin true essence, resulting in the asymmetry of the golden core. This golden core could only collapse, and he could only die. There was not a moment when Xiaohua didn't want to cultivate to the golden core realm, but now, he had truly condensed his golden core, yet he was incomparably regretful. This young master, why did I have to cultivate to the 18th layer of qi refining that day? Why didn't this young master think of the difference between the yin and yang suction forces? Xiaohua was incomparably remorseful. Martial Uncle Zhen Qing, why didn't you write an extra sentence in the jade slip? However, all of Xiaohua's remorse, all of his complaints, how could they change reality? On the Dawn-Rain continent, no one had ever cultivated a cultivation method after the 12th layer of qi refining. This kind of conformist matter was bound to have a cause and effect. If it wasn't for the fact that the meridians refined by the 12th layer of qi refining were exactly the same as the meridians refined by the 3rd layer of foundation establishment, how could this qi refining cultivation method only have the 12th layer, and not the 11th or the 13th layer? Perhaps many years ago, there were people who cultivated to the 11th or 13th layer. Perhaps they also failed or even died when condensing their golden core at this time. Perhaps these lessons were passed down by word of mouth many years ago, or even recorded in a taboo. However, after so many years, cultivators had already forgotten about it. Everyone thought that the 12th layer of qi refining was a matter of course, but who would really think about why it was precisely the 12th layer? Even if Xiaohua asked Master Wu Xian to answer, Wu Xian might not necessarily be able to say anything. Instead, he would probably fly into a rage and berate Xiaohua, forcing Xiaohua to cultivate peacefully. However, Xiaohua had the memories of cultivating to the 18th layer of qi refining, yet he wouldn't ask Wu Xian for advice. Furthermore, Zhen Qing's jade slip also didn't have any records of the balance between yin and yang. Most importantly, in order to find his own origin, Xiaohua chose to cultivate to the 18th layer of qi refining without hesitation. All of these were enough to lead to today's tragedy. Of course, before these tragedies, Xiaohua once again tasted the countless benefits of cultivating to the 18th layer of qi refining. His true essence was a lot more vigorous than ordinary cultivators, and he had the advantage in fights. His divine sense was also far stronger than others, and his cultivation speed was also far faster than others. Unfortunately, everything had a price. Although many times this price was their life, there would always be people who would risk everything to do it. Others laugh at me for being too crazy, and I laugh at them for not being able to see through it. Xiaohua was truly at his wit's end. He smiled bitterly in his heart. Originally, I thought others were idiots, and I had already seen through it. But unfortunately, I was the idiot, and others had already seen through it. This 13th layer of qi refining cultivation method was placed in the Imperial Thunder sect, yet no one cultivated it. I don't believe that with so many capable people, not a single one of them could see through it. Even if they didn't know about the meridians in the entire body, how could they not know if a foundation establishment master explained it to them? Why didn't they cultivate it? Wasn't it because of the balance between yin and yang? Wasn't it because the qi refining cultivation method on Xiaoyu continent only had the 12th layer? Perhaps there were also people who tried, but all of them fell. But, in the end, I'm different from them. I seem to remember that this qi refining cultivation method originally had the 18th layer. In order to find my origin, I could only. It seems. Thinking of this, Xiaohua's heart suddenly moved, and a bright light flashed in his mind. Since the current suction force is different, the root of the difference lies in the two meridians. Since this young master knows about the meridians in the entire body, why can't this young master create a meridian that is similar to the meridians in qi refining after the foundation establishment meridians? Xiaohua immediately thought of the meridians in the entire body that he saw when he was dual cultivating with Fairy Hong Xia. But Xiaohua hesitated again. I don't have a method to refine the meridians in the future. That's right, different meridians, different cultivation stages, require different refining methods. Xiaoyu continent doesn't have a so-called universal cultivation method, and even the water attribute and fire attribute physiques cultivation methods are different. Although Xiaohua knew the location of the meridians, without the corresponding refining method, it was also useless. It seemed that he had reached the end of his rope again. Xiaohua was somewhat impatient, but within his dantian, the two lightning cores were still revolving, emitting hissing lightning. That light purple thing slightly swayed, and the suction force within was still increasing. This is really going to kill me. Xiaohua really wanted to stop condensing his core right now. If it was someone else, perhaps they would really be able to stop. On Xiaoyu continent, cultivators who were stuck at this stage were as numerous as carps crossing the river. One more Xiaohua didn't count as anything. But what was worse was that the two lightning cores were constantly revolving, emitting lightning. Xiaohua was simply powerless to stop it, and the suction force that was tearing his dantian only became stronger, not stronger. Xiaohua himself didn't know whether or not his dantian would be torn apart by this suction force in the end. Xiaohua's primordial spirit, which was comprehending the primordial spirit's sword-controlling technique, didn't have time to continue comprehending, and hurriedly flipped through the many cultivation methods that he had comprehended before. Earth attribute, water attribute, fire attribute, qi refining, foundation establishment, gold core. Xiaohua had collected a lot of cultivation methods, and the meridians involved were also not few. But unfortunately, there wasn't a foundation establishment cultivation method that required meridians. Suddenly, a crazy idea emerged in his mind. Create a cultivation method! -11. Chapter 2688. A self-created cultivation technique? Thinking of this outrageous idea, Xiaohua bitterly smiled. Every cultivation method was a summary of their own cultivation process by a senior with an extremely profound cultivation base, exploring a path that no one had ever set foot on before from the height they stood on. And these seniors were at least nascent soul cultivators, right? So much so that the cultivation techniques created by the senior experts, after their creation, had gone through many years of analysis and modification by many capable people before they finally took shape and could be practiced by low-level cultivators. Xiaohua's current cultivation base was only at the late foundation establishment stage, yet he still wanted to create a cultivation technique for foundation establishment cultivators. This was simply an impossible matter. Normally, even if Xiaohua was beaten to death, he still wouldn't think in this direction. Even if he was really asked to do so, he definitely wouldn't do it. Perhaps he would only smile lightly and say, "Let's leave this matter to those with outstanding talent to worry about. It's better for us commoners to tuck our tails between our legs." But at this moment, the situation was so dangerous. At the juncture of life and death, how could there be any elegance? Perhaps only in this kind of critical moment could a person's potential be stimulated, allowing them to see divine abilities that they normally couldn't see. Seeing the suction force tearing at his dantian and distorting it, Xiaohua stepped into a desperate situation. The idea of creating a cultivation technique gave him a glimmer of hope. With only a slight hesitation, Xiaohua stepped into a domain that he had never thought of before. I've previously practiced the dragon transformation art, so I'm extremely familiar with the meridians in my body. In terms of the path of discovering the meridians, it's 100 times better than those masters who don't know the meridians. In addition, the key at this time is to balance the yin and yang suction forces. It's not necessary to cultivate from the early foundation establishment stage to the late foundation establishment stage. I only need to open up my meridians. It's not necessary to refine my true essence. Also, I have many cultivation techniques here. Even if I don't know how to create a cultivation technique, it's not necessarily impossible to succeed as long as I follow along. Furthermore, I usually practice the dragonization art as well. The tenacity of my meridians is incomparable to that of others. When I'm developing and refining my meridians, I can correct any abnormalities as soon as I notice them. There might not be any mistakes. Lastly, there is an extremely large amount of metal attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the sword tomb, and there is also an extremely abundant amount of sword chi. Furthermore, I obtained the secret art of transforming sword chi into true yuan from the Yu family, so I don't have to worry about absorbing the spiritual energy of the heavens and earth. The more Xiaohua thought about it, the more he felt that there was a glimmer of hope in front of him. Immediately, his heart was filled with incomparable faith. In this world, there will always be a first cultivation technique. This first cultivation technique might not necessarily be the work of a nascent soul or spirit severing stage senior. Since there was someone who could make such an earth-shattering move and create a cultivation world in this world. If that's the case, why can't this young master step on the shoulders of the predecessors and create a simple foundation building technique? With such determination, and in this extremely dangerous place, Xiaohua actually made an astonishing move. He sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes with difficulty, enduring the heart-wrenching pain. The cultivation techniques that he had seen before flashed through his mind, and he tried to find some incantations to refine his meridians. At the same time, the dragonization art also stopped under the control of the other Yuan spirit. That Yuan spirit also gathered at the new meridians and carefully examined the effects of the incantations. At the same time, Xiaohua controlled Xiyinding to open a gap in the Buddhist gold formation, allowing the metal attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and sword chi of the sword tomb to pour in. The heavenly infusion technique in his body was activated again, and the metal attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and sword chi quickly poured into his body, rushing into the meridians that Xiaohua was preparing to open. As he tried the incantations one by one, strands of true chi were refined, and strands of true essence were produced with great difficulty. Needless to say, almost all of the existing incantations were useless. Xiaohua slowly tried to modify individual details according to the meridian's perception. Once the meridians were smooth, the refinement of true chi would immediately proceed. If the details were not satisfied, Xiaohua would have no choice but to figure out a new incantation according to the previous incantations, and then use this incantation to refine the spiritual energy. Time passed slowly like this. In this irreversible time, Xiaohua was racing against time, trying to create a new cultivation technique before the gravitational imbalance collapsed, and to balance the power. Fortunately, Xiaohua's Yuan spirit was very strong, and in this short period of time, he was able to pay attention to many details. When the first strand of true chi was produced in the new meridians, Xiaohua's heart had already calmed down, and the originally extremely unbearable tearing also gradually weakened. Looking at the Buddhist gold formation where Xiaohua was, a huge vortex was slowly forming. Xiaohua was evolving a cultivation technique from the early stage of foundation establishment to the late stage of foundation establishment, and the amount of spiritual energy required was enormous. Although there were large crystals in the range of several hundred li, those crystals were the celestial phenomenon of core condensation, and would not be affected by Xiaohua's cultivation at this time. Kacha, in the high sky, fine golden heavenly lightning was suspended, from time to time rolling and brewing, but it did not fall for a long time. In the sword tomb where 10,000 lightning bolts were not born, the rich gold chi that had accumulated for many years was slowly being defeated by the might of the heavenly lightning. Countless vengeful spirits were fleeing in the midst of the heavenly lightning, trying their best to escape from the shroud of the heavenly lightning. However, this heavenly lightning had an endless suction force, and although it was extremely far away from the vengeful spirits, those vengeful spirits were unable to escape. This was the gold chi that had been defeated by the heavenly lightning, and a huge amount of sword chi was slowly flowing in the sword tomb. The vortex above the Buddhist gold formation was so large that a lot of spirit chi and sword chi inevitably fell into it, and as more and more spirit chi and sword chi flowed in, it formed a torrent that entered the sea. How could Xiao Hua know that he was already changing the current situation of the sword tomb? He was only immersed in the tranquility of creating a cultivation technique. The huge amount of spirit chi and sword chi was absorbed into his body by the immortal body filling technique. The spirit chi flowed into his meridians, and the sword chi was once again transformed into spirit chi by the falling gold mountain's secret technique. Following the spirit chi, it flowed into his meridians, and within his meridians, this spirit chi was just in time for Xiao Hua to try out the newly created cultivation technique chant. It was absolutely impossible to practice the entire cultivation technique before the suction force tore his dantian and body apart. But under Xiao Hua's attempts, new meridians were gradually being opened, and the yin-yang suction force also had a place to go. The huge difference between the yin and yang suction forces was gradually being changed. Moreover, this change was extremely slow in the beginning, but later on, it became faster and faster. This was the same as when Xiao Hua was creating a cultivation technique. In the beginning, it was admittedly unfamiliar and at a loss. But with failure and success, he gradually grasped the knack of it, and the speed at which the cultivation technique chant was being produced became faster and faster. After an unknown amount of time, perhaps several hours, perhaps several days, when Xiao Hua finally practiced the last chant, Xiao Hua calmly opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with incomparable confidence and incomparable calmness. He slightly sensed it and let out a sigh of relief, secretly thinking that he was lucky. In fact, when Xiao Hua was creating the cultivation technique, he had neglected another crucial point, and that was that the 12th layer of qi refining was equivalent to the 3rd layer of foundation establishment. Xiao Hua's 18th layer of qi refining was only 6 layers more than the 12th layer of qi refining. If he were to create the meridians of the 3rd layer of foundation establishment, then, wouldn't the yin-yang suction force be greater than the yin-yang suction force? Wouldn't that cause another imbalance? This problem was also something that Xiao Hua realized in the middle of creating the cultivation technique. But at that time, how could Xiao Hua retreat? He could only brace himself and force his way through. Perhaps it was the effect of the Phoenix Jade Talisman, or perhaps Xiao Hua only focused on opening his meridians and did not thoroughly refine his true essence. This time, a balance was formed. Naturally, in this balance, there was no longer any pain, only a trace of fetters, like a fishbone in his throat. After all, Xiao Hua's newly opened meridians were not completely opened. Xiao Hua's lips curled into a smile as he muttered to himself, "This cultivation technique should be my Fortune Gate's first foundation establishment cultivation technique. It's a rare cultivation technique for the metal element physique." However, after the joy, Xiao Hua was bewildered again. In fact, it had only been a few days since the beginning of the creation of the cultivation method. In such a short period of time, how could it be so smooth? Even if he was really talented and could create his own cultivation technique, how could opening meridians and refining his true essence be something that could be done in a short period of time? Xiao Hua was prepared to risk his life to delay the core condensation process for several weeks or even several months. To be able to succeed in a few days was definitely not what he had imagined. Could it be, my meridians don't need to be expanded? Only need to be able to refine my true essence. Could it be that when I cultivate the dragon transformation art, Xiaohua couldn't help but have some doubts. Forget it, this is a good thing, and now is not the time to investigate. I'll think about it when I don't need to open my meridians. Thinking of this, Xiaohua activated his newly created cultivation technique. Streams of majestic true essence condensed into true essence and rushed towards the final barrier. Boom! A faint muffled sound rang out, as if a wall had been pushed down. The two attractive forces in Xiaohua's dantian suddenly became incomparably balanced, and the true essence in Xiaohua's meridians became still at the same time. The two attractive forces of yin and yang blended together like water and milk, and all the large crystals in the cage involuntarily trembled. Xiaohua understood that this was the best time to condense the core as mentioned in the Zhenqing Jade slip. Without thinking, he slapped his hand and took out a dozen dry separation pills from the space and was about to put them into his mouth. But at this time, a vigorous sword qi rushed into his body, and the already stopped heaven and man body bestowment technique was once again attacked by a large amount of metal element heaven and earth spiritual energy. Xiaohua's body involuntarily trembled. -11. Chapter 2689. Oh? Ah! Xiaohua was slightly stunned. His divine sense swept over, and he was immediately frightened by the huge vortex above his head. Without thinking, he hurriedly urged the seeing cauldron to close the gap in the Brahma gold array. However, the almost endless sword qi and spiritual energy followed the previous trajectory and directly poured in. Xiaohua simply couldn't close the Brahma gold array under the impact of the sword qi that was stronger than a waterfall. He couldn't even stop the sword qi from rushing into his body. The endless stream of sword qi and metal qi was like a torrential river and sea. Xiaohua's back was covered in cold sweat. It was really one wave after another. Each wave was higher than the one before. If Xiaohua was careless, he would fall in this wave. Withdraw! Xiaohua shook his hand and took out the yin-yang sword gourd that was previously stored in the space. He urged the sword gourd to move. The endless metal qi, sword qi, and sword qi continuously rushed into the sword gourd. However, in the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the sword gourd emitted a green and red brilliance. Xiaohua understood that the yin-yang sword gourd couldn't absorb anymore, so he hurriedly put the sword gourd back into the space. Forget it, this young master. Xiaohua smiled bitterly. He was once again forced into a corner, once again tied to a pirate ship. First drink poison to quench thirst, then we'll talk. For a moment, Xiaohua could only activate the dragon transformation art, agitating all the meridians in his body. The two sets of yin and yang meridians heart sutras were displayed. The heavenly infusion technique drew in an endless stream of heaven and earth spirit energy, refining the true energy in his meridians and forming true essence. Rumble! As Xiaohua urged the dragon transformation art, a burst of muffled thunder sounded. It seemed to be in Xiaohua's ears, but it also seemed to be in Xiaohua's body. The power of heavenly thunder was born from the surroundings, slowly imprisoning Xiaohua. Lightning tribulation again! Xiaohua felt the familiar feeling of lightning tribulation when he first entered the Foundation establishment realm. He couldn't help but be shocked and deeply bitterly smile. Forget it, it's like this anyway. Then let's do it together! Thinking of this, Xiaohua simply ignored the lightning tribulation. He only focused on the sword qi that was poured in. As for the sword qi that was poured in, Xiaohua didn't dare to use a secret technique to convert it into true qi. However, he had long since comprehended and modified the Falling Gold Mountain secret technique, which allowed him to directly transform the sword qi into sword origin. Since there was a steady stream of sword essence being produced, Xiaohua very naturally flipped through the sword techniques for sword cultivation. He opened his mouth and spat out two flying swords, cheerfully flying around Xiaohua. Starting from the most basic part, he started cultivating bit by bit. The strands of sword essence condensed by Xiaohua rushed out of the sword technique in his hand, as if chasing after the two flying swords. They formed circle after circle of mysterious sword essence around Xiaohua's body. Inside the sword tomb, with Xiaohua's Buddhist gold great array as the center, the sword chi and spirit chi formed a hurricane. This hurricane was like a tidal wave crashing against the shore, surging towards Xiaohua. As time passed, this hurricane grew larger and larger, and the area it affected also increased. At the edge of the sword catacomb, as if it had sensed the phenomenon of Xiaohua condensing his core, all of the purple jasmine flowers bloomed. Among the bright purple petals, a blood-colored fruit was revealed. This blood-colored fruit was so bright that it reflected the rising sun outside the dense dark clouds, emitting a faint light. Outside the sword tomb, the scattered cultivators of the Dao sect and the sword cultivators of the Huan kingdom, as well as the disciples of the cultivation clans who had come to the vicinity of the sword tomb in search of opportunities, were all shocked by the sudden appearance of this strange phenomenon. All of them had shock on their faces as they looked at the faintly visible lightning flashing above the sword tomb. They knew that something important must have happened for there to be a strange phenomenon in the sword tomb that was devoid of lightning. Perhaps it's time for the cultivation war to come to an end. Everyone had this thought, but the Dao sect cultivators who were trapped in the four directions sword formation did not think so. Even the sword region swordsmen who set up the formation did not think so. LV Rochang and the other third-grade illusory swordsmen had already arrived near the spirit-devouring great array. They had already reorganized the Huan country's swordsmen into a new great array. However, because the spirit chi of heaven and earth in the sword tomb was confined by the phenomenon of Xiaohua condensing his golden core, although the spirit chi of heaven and earth outside the range of the golden core was constantly flowing into the sword formation, this spirit chi of heaven and earth was once again sucked in by the suction vortex formed by Xiaohua earlier. Therefore, there was not much spirit chi in the sword formation for the swordsmen and cultivators to use. LV Rochang and the other sword cultivators wanted to attack, but they were powerless. The swordsmen could not use their flying swords to attack the cultivators. On the other hand, the cultivators wanted to escape, but they were surrounded by the swordsmen and were powerless to do so. Moreover, LV Rochang and the other third-grade illusory swordsmen were injured. Although Heng Ming and the other middle-stage gold core cultivators were weaker than them, they had spirit talismans in their hands. Although the spirit talismans were not as powerful as before in the hands of Heng Ming and the others, they were more than enough to protect themselves. Therefore, the sword cultivators and cultivators were temporarily in a stalemate, each looking forward to the situation turning around. In the blink of an eye, a few days had passed. Although it was only a few days, it was an earth-shaking change for Xiaohua. Xiaohua's sword principle cultivation had been there for a long time. He had been comprehending the sword playing the world for a long time, but he had not had the opportunity to advance further. As for the flying sword technique of the Huan country's sword cultivators, Xiaohua had been comprehending it since he obtained Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword's jade slips. The Dream Slayer and Mountain Splitter were excellent proof. It could be said that Xiaohua's comprehension and cultivation of sword principle had reached a very high level. However, because Xiaohua did not have time, he did not condense sword essence. After arriving at Sentry City, he knew that the Dao sect had a unique method of detecting sword essence, so he did not dare to act rashly. But now, he had obtained the Changbai sect's secret technique and the secret technique to directly transform sword qi into sword essence. At this time, it was really a matter of course for him to cultivate the flying sword principle. To put it simply, Xiaohua's sword path cultivation was like a pond. It had been dug out long ago, but no water had been let in, so it couldn't form a beautiful scenery. Now, after a long drought, the rain came from the sky and filled the pond with water. The pond was like a bright pearl, a beautiful scene indeed. Seeing that the vital essence in his body was becoming more condensed and pure, and the sword essence was flowing smoothly in his body like a river of stars, Xiaohua's mouth unconsciously hung a smile. Of course, at the same time, he had some doubts in his heart. Xiaohua did not know that his physical body was formed from the flesh and blood of the demonic phoenix, and this flesh and blood had been infiltrated by the chaotic qi. He only knew that his physical body was strange, and that all magic treasures could not fuse with his body, which was very different from other cultivators. However, the sword essence of this sword cultivator could circulate in his body and outside his meridians, which surprised him a little. Unexpectedly, he also discovered that although the sword origin was flowing freely in his body, it seemed to have some connection with the location of his middle dantian. However, Xiaohua's middle dantian was sealed. He could only make some guesses based on the trajectory of the sword origin. However, when Xiaohua's gaze fell on the flying dream executioner and mountain splitter, there was a bitter smile on his face. Although these two flying swords flew according to the trajectory of the sword essence outside his body, they could only fly outside and could not fuse with his body. There was extreme helplessness in his joy. Maybe it's because of this, Xiaohua muttered in his heart. This young master's sword essence is so tough that it has already reached the illusory sword realm, but sword intent has not appeared. Since there is no sword intent, then this young master does not need to temper at all, which is why I can rush to such a realm in such a short time. This kind of secret technique to absorb sword qi, presumably the sword cultivators of the Huan country also know. But why don't they have so many illusory swords? I'm afraid it's the same as the Dao sex cultivation. It has to be done step by step. The cultivation of a sword cultivator, on one hand, strengthens the primordial spirit brand in the sword spirit, and on the other hand, tempers one's own sword intent. This refining of sword essence is actually inferior. With only sword essence and no sword intent, one cannot enter the illusory sword or even transform it into a sword. I'm afraid no one will simply absorb sword qi in the sword tomb like this young master. Of course, this young master is also helpless. If I don't absorb sword qi, won't this young master be swollen to death by this sword qi? Xiaohua immediately found an excuse for himself. However, after reaching this point, this young master has once again reached the end. This sword qi, fragmented sword intent, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth are still endlessly pouring in. Although the sword origin looks incomparably pure, there is no sword intent of my own within it. All sorts of mottled and fragmented sword origin fill it. How can I enter the sword transformation stage? Looking at the situation around him and the situation of the Buddhist gold formation, Xiaohua was at his wits' end again. Things did not go as he expected, that there would be a mistake in the process of refining sword essence. The sword qi that was pouring in and wanted to destroy him would unexpectedly stop. Everything was the same as before, moving according to the trajectory. The inertia of this trajectory was so great that it was like a celestial phenomenon. Even the power of the heavenly lightning had imprisoned him, making it impossible for him to stop even if he wanted to. This young master's death is probably coming. Xiaohua was a little sad. This sword tomb is not only the grave of thousands of flying swords, but also the grave of thousands of swordsmen and cultivators. This young master is also going to turn into a purple flower. Thinking of the meaning of the sword tomb, Xiaohua naturally thought of the enlightenment he had when he first arrived at the sword tomb. These flying swords were broken here and laid to rest here. This is the final destination of their bravery in the past. Just like the countless brave swordsmen and cultivators, no matter what reason they fought, they did their duty and did what they should do. Their corpses are laid to rest here, so this place should be respected by all living beings, not destroyed and harassed. Yes, these broken swords have already understood this life. Let this sword tomb be famous throughout the world. Although this young master's name is not known by others, whether it is the terrifying phoenix or that fleeting nameless, I'm afraid that my name will go down in history. Even the phenomenon of this young master condensing his Dan in the sword tomb today will spread out. This young master is also a person whose name will shake the world, and also a sword that will rather break than bend. -11. Chapter 2690. Thinking of this, Xiaohua's heart was filled with determination. That unbending tenacity was also transmitted to the sword essence. Clang! Clang! Two loud sword cries came from the dream executioner and mountain splitter. The two flying swords shook violently. Green and red sword lights were unusually dazzling. Even the sword essence inside and outside of Xiao Hua's body was violently boiling. Xiao Hua was stunned for a moment before he suddenly laughed towards the sky. Ha 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 ha! That laughter was extremely joyous and bold. The ancient said that if you hear it in the morning, you will die at night. This life is enough. I didn't think that I would comprehend sword intent in this desperate situation. Sword intent, sword intent, it is the intent of flying swords. What is a flying sword? Sword! 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 Swords are flying swords. Only swords are true sword intent. There are many sword intents among sword cultivators. Whether it's mountains, flowing water, flying flowers, snowflakes, giant wolves, or even flying phoenixes, they all use all things in the world to explain the essence of flying swords. They all use all things in the world to explain the true meaning of flying swords. Could it be a deviation? Could it be that they are neglecting the essentials? They have really forgotten that only swords would rather break than bend. A sword that stands between heaven and earth with benevolence, heart, truth, and emotions. A sword that does not fear evil, does not fear evil, does not fear wind, does not fear rain, is the true sword intent. Along with Xiaohua's lamentation, even ghost cultivator Huang Yi's tens of thousands of years of grief and comprehension were integrated into his comprehension. The dream executioner and mountain splitter slowly stopped following Xiaohua's comprehension. A fist-sized heart slowly emerged from the sword light. Then, this heart-shaped sword light suddenly expanded, transforming into a small sword several feet long. The dream executioner and mountain splitter merged into the heart sword. Moreover, the heart sword slowly expanded, and the refined sword essence rushed into it. As the heart sword expanded, the sword intent actually penetrated the confinement of Xiaohua's core and the lightning tribulation's confinement outside of the Buddhist gold great array. Wang. Waves of sword cries came from Xiaohua's body, outside of his body, and even outside of the Buddhist gold great array. It was as if 10,000 swords were bowing down. All the broken swords and sword intents were bowing in front of this sword within the sword. Good! Xiaohua's body also began to flicker with sword light. Within the sword light, Xiaohua's body also began to show signs of transforming into a sword. Seeing this, Xiaohua couldn't help but be overjoyed, and thought to himself, if I can transform into a sword, I should be able to escape the confinement of this phenomenon. Rumble, there was a muffled sound of thunder, and the power of heavenly thunder suddenly rose. Although the sword light around Xiaohua's body didn't dissipate, his body returned to its original state, and he didn't even touch a hair that had transformed into a sword. What can I do? Xiaohua laughed bitterly in his heart. I'm afraid it's still because the sword intent and sword spirit can't fuse into the sword heart? Actually, Xiaohua was still wrong. Not to mention that he was currently in the middle of condensing his core, the celestial phenomenon was shackled, and the lightning tribulation was also hanging in the sky. How could it easily allow him to escape? After all, his body was forged from the flesh and blood of a demonic phoenix, and he had the bloodline of an earth dragon. How could he easily transform into a sword like the others? It's still not right. Xiaohua quickly had another idea. If my cultivation is not high enough, how can I perceive the concept of transforming sword? How can I touch the edge of transforming into a sword? That's right, within this Slayer dream is a split primordial spirit. It's not a projection of the primordial spirit. Xiaohua suddenly realized. This sword spirit is originally this young master himself, and I don't need to cultivate my primordial spirit like an ordinary swordsman. This young master only needs to strengthen his primordial spirit according to the sword spirit molding method, and it will be very easy to fuse with the sword intent, and very easy to form the sword heart. Damn it, Li Xiubai, Reverend Bright Sword, you two are really too powerful. Thinking of this Xiao suddenly understood the importance of the two's orthodoxy, and suddenly understood why the two didn't want to fight. With this kind of wonderful secret technique, as long as one carefully comprehended it, it would be easier for them to transform into a sword than an ordinary swordsman. Wouldn't the comprehension and research of such a secret skill be more attractive to the two of them than fame and reputation? More than that. When Xiaohua's gaze fell on the Slayer Dream and Mountain Splitter's heart sword, he murmured again. The heart sword emitted a faint radiance. This radiance was not only green and red, but it was of all kinds of colors. The mottled sword intent within the sword origin had now rushed into the heart sword and transformed into nourishment for the heart sword's sword intent. The sword intent that had rushed into Xiaohua's body along with the sword light was also attracted by the sword within the sword. Like a myriad of streams returning to their origin, the flying sword slowly expanded, and the Dream Executioner and Mountain Splitter actually faintly showed signs of fusing with it. Wasn't this the sign of the sword's spirit and sword intent fusing into one? The sword light flashed, and sword chi soared to the sky. Xiaohua's heart sword's sword intent was just at the initial stage, growing like a newborn calf, unexpectedly showing signs of breaking through the restriction. Xiaohua was overjoyed when he saw this. The sword intent was growing strong. Wasn't that his hope of breaking through the restriction? However, this joy only lasted for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. The endless sword intent crazily poured in, and the growth of the heart sword had already exceeded Xiaohua's control. The primordial spirit of the Dream Executioner felt as if it was floating, as if it was infinitely expanding. Xiaohua could only smile bitterly again. He understood in his heart that he had succeeded in condensing the sword intent, and the sword heart had also taken an embryonic form. However, he had already walked far enough on the path of sword cultivation, and the previous decades of accumulation had been completely exhausted. If the sword intent continued to grow, it would already be out of his control. It might even cause another incessant expansion. Not to mention the Slayer Dream and Mountain Splitter, even everything from before would turn into flowing water. He could only take the sword intent back into his body while he could still control it. It's really like holding a gourd and a ladle floating up. He almost reached out his hand to hold his head. Is this good? Xiaohua was almost racking his brains. That's right, the tranquil deer sword intent. Xiaohua immediately thought of Reverend Brightsword's flying sword that he had obtained from the valley. Xiaohua had previously thought of taking the tranquil deer sword intent for himself, but since he didn't have any sword essence, he could only treat this as a delusion. The tranquil deer sword intent had only been used once to kill Qin Jian, and had never been used again. Perhaps it could be used here. Thinking of this, Xiaohua quickly took out Reverend Brightsword's flying sword. The moment the flying sword appeared in the air, it immediately let out a sharp sword hum, and at the same time, it let out a resplendent sword light. The sword light was like breathing, and the sword hum was like a challenge. The tranquil deer walked out from the flying sword with the sword light, and its originally tranquil eyes were now filled with a trace of irritation. Meh! The tranquil deer let out a soft cry, and its body shone brightly. As expected, an extremely large amount of sword chi separated from it, and flowed into the tranquil deer's sword intent, and the tranquil deer's body gradually expanded. Roar! After half a cup of tea's time, the tranquil deer sword intent let out an angry roar, and actually turned into a white tiger, and roared at the heart sword. Clang! Xiaohua's heart sword intent was not afraid of this at all. With a sword hum, the sound shook the surroundings, scaring the white tiger so much that it trembled slightly. However, the sword origin of the white tiger did not retreat even half a step. Looking at the heart sword and the white tiger confronting each other, Xiaohua was dumbfounded. He let Reverend Brightsword's sword intent share the burden of the heart sword intent, and not let them fight each other. Quiet as a tranquil deer, moving as a fierce tiger. Reverend Brightsword's sword intent is actually of these two types. It's one level higher than Qin Jian and the others. Xiaohua sighed, and put away Reverend Brightsword's flying sword. The tranquil deer's sword intent also helplessly fell into the flying sword. It's not enough to cause trouble. Forget it, I'll just put away the sword intent. Just as Xiaohua activated the sword origin and was about to put away the sword intent, he was a little unwilling. His heart moved slightly, and he stretched out his hand and patted his forehead. The 7 sword pellets refined in the Buddha fire were all taken out. The moment the 7 sword pellets jumped out, they immediately rushed into the heart sword intent, and the sword intent poured into the broken sword pellet like a sweet spring. Good, Xiaohua smiled again. Let's count it as another way to make up for it. No matter what the outcome is today, this sword pellet can still be repaired. Just as Xiaohua thought, within the sword intent of the sword within the sword light, sword qi, and sword intent were all incomparably pure. It was the best supplement to repair the sword pellet. Of course, this was also the beauty of Xiaohua's 9 sword pellets coming from the same source. If it were other sword pellets, this kind of repair would only be incompatible and would conflict with each other. However, Xiaohua's sword intent was formed from dream execution and mountain splitter, and the 9 sword pellets complemented each other. Seeing the cracks on the 7 sword pellets healing at a speed visible to the naked eye, Xiaohua was delighted, but he was also a little scared. He had repaired the sword pellets for so many years, but he couldn't succeed. Looking at this situation, in a short day or even half a day, these 7 sword pellets would probably be completely repaired. From this, it could be seen that the sword qi that poured into the heart sword intent was enormous. If he couldn't control this sword qi, couldn't stop this sword qi from pouring in, then his end would be terrifying. Not only was the sword qi pouring in, at the side of the celestial body empowerment technique, the gold attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth was still pouring in. Xiaohua's newly created cultivation technique was still operating at all times. Fortunately, the meridians had just opened, and there was no true essence inside. If Xiaohua wanted to make up for the homework of the foundation establishment stage, he was afraid that it would take several years, or even more than 10 years. Xiaohua didn't need to worry about that place for the time being. Sure enough, in less than half a day's time, the 7 sword pellets were repaired one by one according to the order from big to small. All of them were incomparably round and flawless. If it was any other time, Xiaohua would have already used the sword nurturing technique to project the primordial spirit of dream execution onto these 7 sword pellets. But these 7 sword pellets had just been repaired, and the sword intent began to increase again. Xiaohua didn't dare to think too much, and hurriedly put the sword pellets back into the Buddha fire, and also put away the sword intent. However, just as the sword pellets fell into the small battle inside the Buddha fire, Xiaohua was stunned. That damaged small battle inside the Buddha fire didn't give off the same green-red brilliance as the sword pellets. Even after several decades, there wasn't any change at all, like a pine tree biting down on a mountain without letting go. -11. Chapter 2691. This small bucket must be a rare treasure. Xiaohua's heart moved, and he took out the sword pill and the small bucket together. Maybe it has some use? Xiaohua had taken out a small bucket. It was completely different from when he had taken out Reverend Brightsword's flying sword and the 7 sword pellets. Everything he had done before had been intentional, and Xiaohua knew that they would definitely be of some use. But this small bucket. Xiaohua was purely trying his luck, purely trying it out. He didn't hold any hope. Who would have thought that the flowers planted with the intention would not bloom, but the willow unintentionally would grow? After the small dipper was taken out, there was no reaction at first, but when Xiaohua raised the small dipper above his head, it was precisely when the sword energy, sword intent, and spiritual energy of heaven and earth poured in. Buzz! A faint, almost inaudible sound came from the small bucket, and all the sword qi, sword intent, and spiritual energy of heaven and earth fell into it, not leaving a single trace behind. Ah! There's no mistake! Xiaohua almost didn't dare to believe his eyes. It's that simple? How could it be so simple? Who knows, in a while, this small bucket will burst. This young master had better hurry and leave. Xiaohua almost didn't think, and was about to stand up. Unfortunately, he only moved a little. The celestial phenomenon of condensing the core could be ignored. At worst, Xiaohua wouldn't condense his core, but the confinement of the heavenly thunder didn't stop because Xiaohua didn't condense his core. Instead, because of Xiaohua's movement, Xiaohua was firmly pressed down, and Xiaohua couldn't even move. Isn't this forcing me? Xiaohua naturally thought of that day during the lightning tribulation, when he couldn't struggle at all. I can only face the tribulation? Xiaohua made a fuss for a long time, and in the end, he still had no choice but to clap his hands, and take out the 9 dry pills again. Into his mouth. The dry pills were indeed miraculous. As soon as he took them, along with the overflowing medicinal liquid, the true essence in his meridians solidified, and this solidification appeared in both his yin and yang meridians at the same time. The 2 solidified true essences, under the effect of 2 balanced suction forces, flowed along his meridians, and headed towards the light purple object in his dantian. Oh? It's actually at the same time? Xiaohua frowned. He was afraid that there wasn't much true essence in the yang meridians, so he hurriedly moved the small bucket hanging above his head to the side, wanting to let some of the heaven and earth's spiritual chi flow down. It was a pity that no matter how Xiaohua moved, all of the metal attribute heaven and earth's spirit chi fell into the small bucket. Not a single strand fell out. Damn it, why are you even more stingy than this young master? Xiaohua was somewhat displeased, but at this moment, a hurricane appeared around Xiaohua's body. Countless large crystals followed the hurricane and rushed towards Xiaohua. This young master has been fooled by this sword tomb. Xiaohua almost scolded himself. He had condensed his own core, and the surrounding astronomical phenomena were all prepared for him to condense his core. How could he lack the spiritual energy of heaven and earth? After scolding himself, Xiaohua did not dare to hesitate. The crystals were pouring in too quickly, and even the dragon transformation art was unable to deal with it. He had no choice but to use both the heavenly body bestowment technique and the dragon transformation art to quickly refine the crystals and send them into his meridians. Xiaohua even took a break from his busy schedule. Not only did he send the 7 sword orbs in the small bucket into the sword intent of the heart sword, he also took out the yin-yang sword gourd and sent it into the sword intent of the heart sword. The astronomical phenomena were indeed astronomical phenomena. Those large crystals looked very shocking, but they were the purest spiritual energy. When they approached Xiaohua's body, they immediately shrank rapidly, as if there was a sumurare around Xiaohua's body. They were all absorbed into Xiaohua's meridians by the heavenly body bestowment technique. Under the dragon transformation art and the mental cultivation method, these crystals were easily refined. Under the effect of the dry pill, they condensed into a solid state and fell into the suction force of the dantian. They followed the meridians and entered the dantian. However, there were so many crystals, and the speed at which they poured in was so fast that Xiaohua was really tired to deal with them. Hiss, hiss. The yin-yang thunder pill that had been revolving in his dantian once again emitted electric light. The condensed true essence and crystals all fell into the electric light. At the beginning, that light purple object was only a cluster of illusory light. As the true essence and crystals fell in, that illusory light gradually solidified. This solidification was similar to when Xiaohua was refining pills. Strange runes appeared on it, and these runes flickered with the electric light, constantly overflowing. Immediately afterwards, the purple object trembled slightly. A black and white brilliance flashed, and a needle-shaped sphere visible to the naked eye appeared out of thin air. Rumble. Following the emergence of this needle-shaped sphere, Xiaohua's entire body trembled. The brewing heavenly thunder in the sky once again let out a sound, and all the spiritual energy that poured into Xiaohua's body once again sped up. It's condensing the pill! Xiaohua had a kind of realization in his heart. However, at this time, his mind was already clear. He didn't think about the lightning tribulation, nor did he care about the sword intent pouring in. Like a machine, according to his own feelings, he sent 9 dry pills into the air to maintain the solidification of his true essence. The dragon transformation art also didn't have any scruples. Ignoring the almost oppressive sound of thunder, it operated at an extremely fast speed, tempering his true essence. One day and night quickly passed. Xiaohua had taken no less than 600 dry pills, and he was practically taking them non-stop. However, the true essence that was pouring into his body and the true essence still showed no signs of stopping. Is there a mistake? Although Xiaohua wanted to keep his mind clear, at this time, he couldn't help but jump up and down. When I was building my foundation, I took 360 foundation establishment pills. Now that I've condensed my true essence, don't tell me I have to take 720 dry pills? Looking at the golden core in Xiaohua's dantian, it was now the size of a fist. Electric light lingered on it, and the two thunder cores on the left and right sides slowly rotated, occasionally sending lightning into the golden core. I'm afraid it has something to do with these two thunder cores, Xiaohua inwardly muttered to himself. Because he already knew from Zhen Qing's jade strip that late-stage foundation establishment cultivators condensing their golden core was different from qi refining cultivators. There was a process of condensing the golden core, and it was also based on the cultivator's cultivation base. The size of the golden core was determined by the cultivator's true essence, and it took time. A short period of several days, a long period of several months, and even several years. For him to be able to condense his golden core into such a large and perfect size in one day and night, it was definitely unusual. These thunder cores were the most important. But I'm afraid I don't have many dry pills left. Xiaohua took a rough look, and secretly complained. If it's 720 pills, it's barely enough. This Yuqingtian storage pouch actually had 100 or 200 pills. They were his Yu family's many years of accumulation, and they were prepared to leave them for his disciples. I'm afraid these 700 pills won't be enough. That would be terrible. Where should I go to find more pills at this time? As the saying goes, fortune doesn't come in pairs, and misfortune doesn't come alone. Xiaohua was just thinking about the dry pills when the deafening sound of thunder fell down. Ah! Isn't this forcing me into a dead end again? Xiaohua already wanted to cry in his heart, but no tears came out. He really didn't understand. It was just a foundation establishment stage, just a core condensation stage. What kind of bullshit thunder tribulation was this? In Zhen Qing's jade slip, there was no record of this at all. Fortunately, Xiaohua had already experienced the baptism of thunder tribulation under the altar in the flamed forest swamp, so he could be considered to have some experience. He hurriedly calmed his mind, and slowly released his divine sense. Like a thief walking on tiptoe, he probed the sky outside the Buddhist gold great array. However, his divine sense had only just reached a height of several feet when a strange voice unexpectedly sounded in his mind. This voice was somewhat distant, and also somewhat vague. Xiaohua was startled. This was the most critical moment for him, so how could there be any mishaps? After Xiaohua withdrew his divine sense, he pondered for a moment, and felt that this voice didn't seem to belong to Little Yellow. Then who else could it be? That's right, Little White! Xiaohua suddenly realized, and hurriedly entered the mysterious dark clouds. However, at this time, the mysterious dark clouds were different from usual. The entire dark clouds were no longer flowing like before, and were almost completely stagnant. The sole strands that could easily enter and exit the dark clouds seemed to be imprisoned by thousands of times, extremely obscure. What's going on? Xiaohua had some doubts in his heart, but he didn't dare to be negligent, and hurriedly entered the heaven ring of aura. As soon as he entered the heaven ring of aura, an incomparably suffocating feeling rushed into his mind. Xiaohua, is there a thunder tribulation outside? Little White didn't wait for Xiaohua to speak, and hurriedly asked. Yes. Xiaohua was actually a bit hesitant. Little White wasn't like Little Yellow, and couldn't be considered to understand too much. He still had some things that he didn't want Little White to know. Quickly send me out, Little White urged. What? You want to undergo thunder tribulation? Xiaohua was shocked. You're just a soul body. How can you withstand the baptism of heavenly thunder? Moreover, if your soul has condensed, you can, but right now, you're extremely weak. There's no need for the entire thunder tribulation, right? Just a trace of heavenly thunder tribulation can turn you into ashes, right? I've gone through thunder tribulation before. I still have some experience with this thunder tribulation. Little White knew that time was pressing, and couldn't explain too much. He said concisely, "My own thunder tribulation definitely won't appear at this time. This thunder tribulation isn't my thunder tribulation, you and I are just spectators. Even if we're affected by the thunder tribulation, we definitely won't suffer too much damage. In addition, the thunder tribulation is a death tribulation, but this death tribulation also breeds life. Haven't you heard of it? Thunder gives birth to all things, and this heavenly thunder is the most fertile. Everything in the world is born from the power of thunder. Oh right, if you want to refine this trace of your primordial spirit into an avatar, it's best to let it go out and undergo thunder tribulation. This is essential." "What? This trace of my primordial spirit?" Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How old is he? Won't he be turned into ashes in the thunder tribulation? "Listen to me," Little White said. "Even if this thunder tribulation destroys this trace of your primordial spirit, your mind will only be damaged. What if it succeeds? The mystery in the future, even I can't explain it clearly." -11. Chapter 2692. All right. Seeing Little White so anxious, Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly waved his soul thread, and with great difficulty, he sent Little White Dragon's soul out of the heavenly ring. The confinement of the lightning tribulation was really powerful. It directly penetrated Xiaohua's soul. To be able to send Little White Dragon out of the heavenly ring, he definitely spent a lot of effort. However, before Little White Dragon came out of the heavenly ring, it said something that almost made Xiaohua collapse. "Besides, you were affected by someone else's lightning tribulation. When I come out, I can also guide you on how to avoid the tribulation. I can guarantee your safety. Damn it, this is my lightning tribulation." Xiaohua almost wanted to roar. However, there was no need for Xiaohua to say anything. As soon as Little White came out of the heavenly ring, it was immediately restrained by the heavenly lightning. Looking at the surrounding situation, how could it not know that this was Xiaohua's own lightning tribulation? Little White was extremely shocked. It really couldn't understand how Xiaohua, a cultivator from the human realm, could have a demon beast's lightning tribulation. Its entire soul swam a few times in the air with difficulty. It looked at Xiaohua and originally wanted to ask, but seeing that the lightning tribulation was about to arrive, where was the time to dawdle? However, when it saw tiny dough in the air, its body began to tremble. Roar! The little white dragon opened its mouth wide and let out a dragon's roar. Its entire body soared into the air and began to slowly swim around tiny dough. Little White flew up. Xiaohua was a bit hesitant. Little White's words were a kind of temptation. After the primordial spirit was divided, the growth was slow. If it was really like what Little White said, the primordial spirit could become an independent body, then it was worth a try. Let's do it! How many tribulations can there be in life? Xiaohua clenched his teeth. Several primordial spirits that could come out were all sent out by him. Naturally, Xiaohua didn't dare to leave these primordial spirits under the lightning tribulation. That was no different from a naked woman standing in front of a pervert. After Xiaohua sent these primordial spirits into the heart sword, he released all the soul threads in the heavenly ring. Even the Buddha's Saraira was sent out by Xiaohua. Xiaohua really didn't care about the consequences of taking advantage of the situation. After doing all this, Xiaohua let out a long sigh of relief. He released his divine sense once more, probing the air. Alas, fortunately, Little White Dragon is already so excited that it is wholeheartedly preparing to face the tribulation. If it sees that Xiaohua actually has so many primordial spirits, I'm afraid it might fall from the sky. At this moment, the sky was filled with dark clouds, and it couldn't get any lower. Although Xiaohua's spiritual force couldn't completely see through the dark clouds, it was obvious that the range of the dark clouds had already exceeded the size of the last time Xiaohua built his foundation. Moreover, the black clouds had a dark red color. The dark red color constantly flickered and rapidly surged, as if there was endless thunder water rolling within. Looking at the edge of the black clouds again, there were strands of heavenly lightning that were as thick as a thumb jumping around faintly. Occasionally, there were a few strands of lightning that actually had a kind of bright golden color. This golden color was clearly different from the first lightning tribulation Xiaohua encountered. Kacha! A sound of thunder flashed from where Xiaohua's spiritual force was probing. It was as if the building was overturned, and a series of sounds spread in all directions, stretching for more than 100 li, that incomparably oppressive, incomparably solemn, and even incomparably terrifying heavenly lightnings might had already enveloped the entire Buddhist gold great array, and within 100 li of this might was within this might. Alas, today's lightning tribulation seems to have come a bit early. After Xiaohua's spiritual force probed out, he immediately withdrew it, fearing that he would be hit by the lightning tribulation. When he built his foundation for the first time, the lightning tribulation descended following the completion of his foundation. Although Xiaohua was somewhat caught unprepared, it wasn't to the point of being flustered. But now, there was still a small amount of true essence in his meridians that hadn't solidified. The golden core in his dantian was admittedly the size of a fist, but in reality, it wasn't complete. Now that the lightning tribulation struck down, what do you think Xiaohua should deal with first? Feeling that the heavenly lightning's might was even fiercer than the previous heavenly lightning's might, the remaining true essence in Xiaohua's body began to gradually solidify, and could no longer freely flow. Moreover, with a rumbling sound, a burst of silent thunder resounded in his heart, and a burst of indescribable fear emerged from Xiaohua's heart. Xiaohua understood that the lightning tribulation had already begun. Immediately, everything around him and even within his body couldn't move. He could only rely on his physical body to welcome the lightning tribulation. At this moment, Xiaohua suddenly quivered. Damn it, my true essence has already solidified. Why can't this young master take advantage of this moment to condense his golden core? Thinking of this, Xiaohua waved his hand, and no longer cared about the number of 9, he took out the remaining dry distance pills, and threw them all into his mouth. Kacha! A series of oppressive sounds of heavenly thunder resounded, and a thread of lightning, as thick as a thumb, sparkled with golden light, was born from the dark clouds, and directly fell down. When that lightning fell on the Buddhist gold great array, it suddenly sprinkled down, and unexpectedly turned into a golden lightning net. That Buddhist gold great array was like snow that met with boiling water, and instantly disappeared. The lightning net fell down, and a part of it fell on Xiaohua's body, and another part fell on Xiaohua's soul, and even more fell on Xiaohua's body. Ah! That kind of indescribable pain was born in Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua really wanted to throw his primordial spirit into space to avoid this kind of discomfort, but at this time, his primordial spirit was firmly controlled within his body, and it was simply impossible for him to move. Moreover, after this kind of indescribable pain, an even more intense pain drowned Xiaohua like a tide. Needless to say, this pain came from the primordial spirit within the heart sword. Although Xiaohua's willpower was firm, in front of this kind of pain that was 10 times more painful, he was still on the verge of fainting. Damn it, little white dragon. Xiaohua really regretted that he was too soft, too greedy. Last time, when this young master faced the lightning tribulation, I still had the phoenix celestial body to resist it, but this time. Xiaohua was in pain, and he unconsciously thought of the celestial body he lost. At this moment, his body was filled with golden lightning, and his body was instantly torn apart. However, at the same time, the 132 million tiny dots flickered with lightning, flickering in and out of existence. Occasionally, they would undergo nirvanic rebirth, and the fleshly body would instantly heal. Naturally, the lightning tribulation this time was the same as before. Not only did it penetrate his body, it also penetrated deep into his meridians. His already orange bones were covered with lightning, and those lightning threads quickly swam above Xiaohua's bones. Not only was the majority of the blood threads that were torn out of his body absorbed by his bones, but the lightning threads also penetrated into his bones, and the orange color on his bones increased. The blood threads that didn't have time to be absorbed by his bones slowly fell, entering his meridians and dantian. Within his meridians, under the operation of the dragon transformation art, the meridians that were also torn apart by the lightning were constantly being reconstructed, as if a crazy dragon was waiting to be reborn. Within his meridians, the true origin that had yet to solidify quickly solidified under the effect of the heaven separation pill. Moreover, because of the lingering lightning, these true origin condensed into lumps and rushed into his dantian under the push of the lightning. But the strange thing was, these lumps were different from the true origin that was sucked into the gold core before. They couldn't fuse with the gold core from before, but instead closely followed the male and female lightning cores, circling around the fist-sized gold core. As for the lightning threads that followed the meridians into his dantian, they were once again attracted by the male and female lightning cores and rushed into them. Boom boom. 2 crisp sounds rang out, and the male and female lightning cores were actually smashed into pieces. However, at this time, there was a little bit of blood in his dantian, and those blood threads were not afraid of the lightning. The blood threads penetrated into the lightning core, and at the same time, the lightning core rotated and slowly solidified. The dragon transformation art within Xiaohua's meridians was like a coiling dragon, and under the small battle in midair, the soul of the little white dragon was a real coiling dragon. But when the lightning came down, the little white dragon's soul was immediately destroyed by the terrifying lightning tribulation as soon as it came in contact with the lightning threads. However, the remaining little white dragon, which was only the size of a little finger, was once again surrounded by lightning threads, and seemed to have more vitality. The entire soul emitted a strange fluctuation, and threads of silver light seeped out from the small battle, landing on the little white dragon's soul, and the soul actually solidified within the lightning threads. Looking at the Buddha's Saraira, it was also somewhat different from the lightning tribulation from before. The entire Saraira was also first shattered by the incomparably sharp lightning, and then slowly regenerated on the lotus seat of the Buddha's Saraira, solidifying bit by bit. The regenerated Buddha's Saraira was clearly repaired in many places, and the color of the Buddha's Saraira was also much brighter. Next to the Buddha's Saraira, the sword intent of the heart sword also flashed with lightning. This lightning scattered the heart sword in an instant, but after the heart sword was scattered, the benevolent heart did not disappear, and a faint heart-shaped sword image flashed with lightning, enveloping the dream executor, mountain splitter, and the 7 sword orbs. Even the 2 flying swords and the 7 sword orbs were also surrounded by lightning. Xiaohua's pitiful primordial spirit and the soul threads that stretched out from the heaven ring disappeared in an instant under the lightning tribulation, almost like the sunlight shining through the darkness. However, at the place where the primordial spirit disappeared, an extremely faint, almost undetectable fluctuation suddenly appeared the moment the primordial spirit disappeared. This fluctuation followed the flickering of the lightning threads to the place where the soul threads disappeared, and then followed the traces of the soul threads into the Law-Eye's soul mark, and rushed into the mysterious dark cloud. The mysterious dark cloud's location changed even more. The entire dark cloud trembled violently, and countless lightning flashed within, rumbling loudly. It was almost comparable to the lightning tribulation that wreaked havoc on the sword tomb. The fluctuation that entered the mysterious dark cloud rushed inside, and the entire dark cloud swelled. Then, lightning flashed in all directions, and the fluctuation returned with the lightning. After passing through the soul threads flashed with brilliance, and gradually took shape. After passing through the soul marks in the Law-Eye's soul marks also trembled rapidly, and with this trembling, the Law-Eye on Xiaohua's left hand also responded. However, Xiaohua did not notice this change at this time. When the fluctuation returned to the place where the primordial spirit disappeared in the heart sword, the fluctuation became even calmer. A dot of black and white appeared from the fluctuation, and with the appearance of the black and white, lightning immediately rushed over, unceasingly attacking the newly born primordial spirit. Lightning birthed all things, it was indeed so. -11. Chapter 2693. Looking at the benevolent heart again, it only slightly surged a few times, just like a heartbeat. Then, within the flickering lightning, it slowly formed the sword intent of the heart sword. Within the sword intent, in addition to the sword light, there was also lightning. Xiaohua really felt like a year. Although this lightning tribulation did not cause any threat to his life, that kind of stinging pain and itchiness made Xiaohua feel like death was better than living. Xiaohua's divine sense could not leave his body, so he naturally could not see the situation of the small bucket above his head. Although he already knew that the small bucket was a strange object, he still underestimated the power of this small bucket. The mottled sword Qi, the broken sword intent, and the extremely tyrannical gold attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth fell into the small bucket like a whale swallowing water. The small bucket's body actually did not change at all. Only under the lightning of the 3 gold lightning tribulation did the lightning threads that fell into the small bucket have a slight reaction. Moreover, the small bucket's damaged areas had some small repairs. Following the repair of the small bucket under the lightning tribulation, there was actually some extremely pure gold attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth leaking out from the small bucket's damaged areas. This gold attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth was different from the silver-white color that entered the little white dragon's soul. It directly poured into the top of Xiaohua's head, and when this spiritual energy entered Xiaohua's body, part of it entered his flesh, part of it entered his meridians, and even part of it rushed into his dantian. In his dantian, there was still the solid true essence and lightning revolving around the golden core, but there were more and more solid objects. This solid true essence was like an even smaller golden core, like a small sphere revolving around the golden core, according to a mysterious orbit. This orbit was actually somewhat similar to the heavenly Tao starry sky. The small bucket's gold Qi rushed into his dantian, part of it adhered to the golden core, part of it adhered to other solid objects, and there was more and more. The remaining part of it wandered around the golden core and solid true essence. After an unknown amount of time, the movement in Xiaohua's body became smaller, and the pain and all kinds of other feelings slowly lessened. Xiaohua let out a long sigh of relief, and secretly said, "It's finally over." Thinking of this, Xiaohua prepared to take a look at the situation of his core condensation. But just as he was using inner sight, he didn't see anything clearly. Ka-cha-cha! A golden thread of lightning that was a bit thicker than before struck down again. "Still, do you want me to live?" Xiaohua's body was being suppressed to death, and he was practically roaring in his heart. That's right. Since there was a second heavenly thunder, who knew if there would be a third? Who knew if there would be a fourth? Xiaohua's flesh and blood had been torn to shreds. His recovery speed was already somewhat unable to keep up with the tearing speed. His meridians were also in a heart-tearing and lung-splitting pain. Who knows whether or not the next few bolts of heavenly lightning would directly take Xiaohua's life. Reincarnation after reincarnation, what was the point of suffering for millions of years? Xiaohua endured another wave of pain, as if he was thinking of Huan Yi's bone-deep sorrow. The pitiful Xiaohua was using the body of a cultivator to resist the 3rd gold lightning tribulation of a demonic beast. He was probably the most miserable person on the Dawn Rain continent. However, he was not the only one in the Sword Catacomb who was in such a miserable state. Spirit-devouring Great Formation could no longer be called Spirit-devouring Great Formation. Under the disturbance of Xiaohua's core condensation celestial phenomenon, those spirit-devouring bugs that didn't care whether they were real or fake all pounced on the pure crystal, and most of the real spirit-devouring bugs were killed by the Jindan cultivator's talismans. When the pagoda exploded, those spirit-devouring bugs were even more out of control. No matter how many sword cultivators urged them, those spirit-devouring bugs ignored them. LV Rochang and the others had no choice but to rush to the sword formation, preparing to use the sword formation formed by the swordsmen to fight against the cultivators. However, under the influence of Xiaohua, there was no spiritual qi of heaven and earth in this sword formation. No matter whether it was the swordsmen or the cultivators, they had no way to borrow strength and had to fall into a helpless stalemate. They all wanted to wait for the celestial phenomenon to end before making a decision. However, the development of the matter once again exceeded the expectations of the middle stage gened and cultivators, and the third-grade illusory swordsmen. When the terrifying gold nature spiritual qi of heaven and earth was instantly absorbed by Xiaohua, the spiritual qi of heaven and earth that came from afar didn't stop in the sword formation. Instead, it formed a bigger hurricane and rolled to the west. Not only that, LV Ruochang and the others were extremely sensitive to the fact that not only the gold nature spiritual qi of heaven and earth was like this, but the sword qi and the broken sword rain were also swept away. What the hell is going on? LV Ruochang really didn't understand. She only knew that the sword qi and sword essence in this sword tomb had no special benefits for the breeding and tempering of flying swords. What did a cultivator need these things for when he was pregnant? A few days later, things once again shocked LV Ruochang and the others. It was once again far beyond what they had seen and heard. In the sword tomb where there was no lightning, thunder rolled in the sky. Although there was the heavenly thunder, it didn't affect the sword qi and spiritual qi in the sword tomb. In the end, the dark clouds pressed down. Although the heavenly thunder didn't strike down in a large area, only 3 thunder tribulations, under the dark clouds, more spiritual qi, more sword qi, and more sword essence were disturbed. The whole sword tomb was already unstable. After tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of thousands of years of accumulation, it was gradually collapsing. This was not the most important thing. What was worse was that under the heavenly thunder, there was a strange small battle. That small battle was used by Xiaohua to resist the spiritual qi and sword qi pouring in. At this time, the small battle had changed from passive to active. It continuously absorbed the spiritual qi, and sword essence disturbed by the heavenly thunder, adding fuel to the fire. As a result, everything in the sword tomb was affected. The remaining magic array and sword array around the Buddhist gold array were the first to be affected. Traces of spiritual qi and sword qi were sucked out gradually until the entire sword array and magic array collapsed and was sucked into the suction force. Then came the 10-direction annihilation array, which swept away all the spiritual qi and sword qi within dozens of miles. Then came the 4-direction sword array, and the magic array and sword array outside the 4-direction sword array. In the end, the purple jasmine flowers at the edge of the sword tomb rushed into the air. The sky was filled with purple, mixed with spots of blood red mottled, and rushed to the center of the sword tomb. Outside the sword tomb, the wind was also raging. All the swordsmen and cultivators were fleeing in panic. Even outside the sword tomb, the situation was like this. What could LV Ruochang, whose magic array was already destroyed, do? Although the momentum absorbed by the small battle was very large, it was still ineffective against cultivators and swordsmen. However, in this fierce wind, LV Ruochang was like a defeated hen. Her face was pale, and she looked at the countless sword intents rolling up various celestial phenomena in the air in a daze, making the final performance. LV Jianyu. Ruo Ling was also greatly disappointed. She whispered, "We are not lucky, but it's nothing." "No!" LV Ruochang bit his lips and waved his hand. "Even if there is such a strong celestial phenomenon, but this is definitely not something that a pregnant cultivator can have. Let's get ready. Once the celestial phenomenon ends, we will immediately surround and kill the cultivators. I don't believe that just these hundreds of thousands of cultivators can't be killed by our hundreds of thousands of swordsmen." "Yes, we understand." When the surrounding swordsmen saw LV Ruochang's persistence, they could only force themselves to answer. At this point in the battle between cultivators, the result, was it really that important? Kacha, when the third heavenly lightning came down like a lightning net, Xiaohua wanted to howl miserably. The power of the heavenly lightning was getting fiercer and fiercer each time. Not to mention Xiaohua's pain, the few traces of blood that seeped out were now slowly dripping down along the surface of his body. However, it was also thanks to Xiaohua's primordial spirit. Not only did he painstakingly cultivate the bone tempering technique, he also painstakingly cultivated the body tempering technique. Furthermore, he also had the dragon transformation art circulating at all times. "I can't let the fourth heavenly lightning come," Xiaohua clenched his teeth and endured the changes in his body. He prayed in his heart. After this heavenly lightning tribulation, I will definitely put more effort in these aspects in the future. When I become pregnant, the heavenly lightning tribulation will be even more shocking. Although Xiaohua suffered a lot, he also benefited a lot. Not to mention that his physical body, meridians, and bones improved greatly under the heavenly lightning tribulation. Even the Buddha's relic was reconstructed under the heavenly lightning tribulation. Except for the part that Xiaohua didn't cultivate, the rest were all solid. However, the strange thing was that there were countless vengeful spirits in the sword tomb. These vengeful spirits were also absorbed by Xiao Dou, and not a single one was left out. Xiaohua originally wanted to expiate a few of them and improve the cultivation of the Buddha's relic, but his wishful thinking was in vain. After the heavenly lightning tribulation, Little White Dragon's soul was really too small. It couldn't be compared to before the heavenly lightning tribulation, but the difference was like heaven and earth. They couldn't be compared at all. However, the sword intent that Xiaohua placed outside was not affected by Xiao Dou. Even when the 3 gold heavenly lightning tribulation struck it, the heart sword didn't show any signs of collapse. Instead, it became stronger under the heavenly lightning tribulation. Not only was there lightning on the surface, there were also countless tiny electric sparks flowing inside. This electric sparks not only flowed through the flying sword, sword pill, primordial spirit, and soul strands, but also seeped into the yin-yang sword gourd. The heart sword intent was like this, but it wasn't much. Xiaohua's Jindan had changed even more. Now, Xiaohua's Jindan was already the size of 2 fists. Moreover, the 2 thunder pills and the solid true essence from before were already gone. It was completely a complete Jindan. However, under the silver brilliance of this Jindan, the first Jindan that was condensed was already intact. The mysterious runes on the surface were naturally formed. The solid true essence from before had now turned into countless silver granules. These silver granules had traces of lightning on the surface. They were like stars revolving around the Jindan in the middle. The 2 thunder pills from before were now much bigger. From time to time, lightning would still be produced from them and fly towards the Jindan in the middle. -11. Chapter 2694. The strangest thing was that between the golden core, lightning core, and granules, there were a lot of silver things. These things were like clouds, in the shape of silk. They were scattered all over the gaps without any pattern. The lightning threads could easily pass through them without being affected at all. This kind of strange golden core. Even if he saw it with his own eyes, he wouldn't dare to believe it. He would definitely be happy and angry at Xiaohua for making things so complicated. Even the condensation of the golden core was a mess. It was unprecedentedly bizarre. Not to mention the condensation of the golden core. When Xiaohua was building his foundation, he created a gimmick of the 18th level of qi condensation, delaying the date of building his foundation for many years. Only now, when he truly condensed his golden core, did the hidden danger of the 18th level of qi condensation reveal itself. It was really because he encountered a special environment like the sword tomb that he was able to pass through this hidden danger. It was really unknown what kind of earth-shattering thing Xiaohua would do when he was pregnant with a golden core like this. Yes, it really was an earth-shattering thing. When Xiaohua passed the 3rd tribulation lightning, his body, which had suffered very little damage, seemed to have been cut into pieces by 1,000 blades. The surface layer was dripping with blood. Most of the blood threads were absorbed back into his body when his body healed after the lightning tribulation. However, there were still some blood threads that dripped down, directly passing through the remnants of the Buddhist gold great array and seeping into the ground of the sword tomb. However, at this time, the sword tomb, could it still be called a sword tomb? Roar, a dragon roar came from the little white dragon's mouth. This roar was extremely loud, and it actually had the momentum to shake the surroundings. It was very obvious that it was completely different from before the lightning tribulation. Xiaohua, quickly send me back. I want to meditate, don't disturb me. Carefully savor the harvest of the lightning tribulation. After the dragon roar, the little white dragon cried out weakly. Okay. Xiaohua didn't say anything, but he muttered in his heart. It's already like this, and you're still trying to show off. What are you shouting for? Thinking of this, Xiaohua sent out his soul strands to entangle the little white dragon. Xiaohua originally thought that his soul strands, which had undergone the lightning tribulation, would be able to easily send the little white dragon into the heavenly ring. In the end, the little white dragon's soul had become much heavier. He still had to expend a tremendous amount of effort to complete this task. Naturally, when Xiaohua sent the little white dragon into the heavenly ring, the several primordial spirits within the heart sword all returned to their original positions. Following which, Xiaohua followed the little white dragon's instructions and began to carefully comprehend it. Xiaohua closed his eyes and sat cross-legged high up in the sky. The Buddhist golden array had been broken and his figure had long since been revealed. However, he didn't move. While he was carefully comprehending the feeling of condensing his core and the thunder tribulation, he was also inspecting his body, meridians, bones, and other changes. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, Xiaohua opened his eyes. His face was filled with joy, but at the same time, he was frowning slightly. Strange, where did the 2 lightning cores in my dantian go? Could it be that because of the lightning tribulation, it fused with this young master's golden core? Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled. But if that's the case, then what about this young master's lightning drawing technique? Thinking of this, Xiaohua stretched out his hand and used the lightning drawing technique. At this time, above Xiaohua's head, although the thunder tribulation had already passed, the dark clouds didn't dissipate so quickly. If it were any other time, once Xiaohua's spell was cast, 10,000 bolts of lightning would have already descended. But this time, his thunder drawing technique actually failed. Damn it, there really is a problem! Xiaohua was somewhat disappointed. Looking at the slowly dissipating dark clouds, he was unhappy. This young master's meridians seem to have undergone earth-shaking changes. The tempering of my bones has also reached 99%. Even the strength of my body has greatly changed after the lightning tribulation. But this young master is a terrifying phoenix. Without the lightning drawing technique, this young master can only be a bald man. Alas, this golden core seems to be not small. It's even bigger than the golden core cultivators that this young master killed before. Thinking of this, Xiaohua's body suddenly bloomed with golden light. It was the protective golden light of ordinary golden core cultivators. Go! Xiaohua waved his hand and a fireball flew out. Boom! With a loud sound, flames soared into the sky within a range of several dozen zhang. Hee! Xiaohua's heart was filled with a trace of joy. The method of controlling true essence of a jinan is indeed very different from that of a foundation building. Not only is the magic power several times stronger, even the speed is also much faster. Moreover, with this golden core, even in a situation where there is no spiritual energy of heaven and earth, I can still use great magic. What is this? As far as Xiaohua's eyes could see, there were actually more than a dozen fist-sized spirit-swallowing bugs flying around. One of them rushed towards the place where Xiaohua's fireball was just now, the others were wandering around nearby, and there were even 2 that rushed towards Xiaohua. These are spirit-swallowing bugs! Xiaohua's heart was suddenly filled with joy. He had seen spirit-swallowing bugs in the sword slip before. Why are there spirit-swallowing bugs here? Oh, I reckon that Xiao Dou sucked them here. Thinking of this, Xiaohua waved his Taoist robe, and the space of several zhang was imprisoned. These spirit-swallowing bugs couldn't move at all. Xiaohua then put them all into his sword pouch. The heaven and earth sleeve technique has also improved. This is... Xiaohua's heart was filled with joy again. He released his divine sense, wanting to see if there was anything else that he had missed. However, when he released his divine sense, he saw the purple jasmine flowers sweeping through the sky and the specks of blood spots in the purple sea. He couldn't help but be shocked. Aren't the purple jasmine flowers at the edge of the sword tomb? Could it be... Xiao Hua almost jumped up from the ground where he was sitting cross-legged. He looked at Xiao Dou above his head in disbelief. Since Xiao Dou had undergone the thunder tribulation, there had been no pure gold spiritual qi of heaven and earth left behind. Moreover, the damaged part seemed to have been repaired now. Could it be this thing? Xiao Hua thought, and hurriedly released his divine sense. When his divine sense really saw the situation outside the Buddhist gold formation, he opened his mouth even wider. Yes, above the dark clouds, the sun had already appeared. The golden sunlight was sprinkling down, and it looked like the wind was blowing. It was noon. The sword formation, the magic formation, the accumulated sword essence, had long disappeared. How is this possible? The sword tomb is thousands of miles wide. Xiao Hua's mind raced. Although he already knew that since the purple jasmine flowers at the edge of the sword tomb had been sucked here by Xiao Dou, and the unique gloominess of the sword tomb had disappeared, this fact already proved that Xiao Hua's guess was true. However, he still denied this guess in his heart. After all, this was really too big. Thinking about this, Xiao Hua probed again and released his divine sense. His divine sense was no longer restricted by the sword tomb, and in an instant, it stretched out for nearly 100 miles. Oh? Why are there so many Dao sect cultivators here? When Xiao Hua's divine sense swept past the previous location of the 10-direction annihilation formation, he was surprised to find that there were actually many Dao sect disciples here. These disciples were wearing the robes of various sects and looked panicked. When did my Dao sect disciples come to the sword tomb? Xiao Hua was somewhat baffled. But why haven't I seen the sword cultivators of the Huan country? Xiao Hua's divine sense immediately attracted the attention of the Dao sect disciples. Many disciples released their divine senses and swept toward Xiao Hua's direction. However, these disciples' divine senses only swept out 100 feet before they were immediately awakened and hurriedly withdrew their divine senses. Wasn't the divine sense coming from the direction of the pregnant Dao sect master? Wasn't it calm now because the pregnant Dao sect master had successfully stepped into the nascent soul stage and released her divine sense? Which disciple didn't want to live and look for trouble? There are disciples from various sects, and there are even disciples from the Imperial Thunder sect. Xiao Hua was increasingly baffled. Could it be that my Dao sect disciples are fighting with sword cultivators in the sword tomb? He was completely confused. Xiao Hua's divine sense swept around, but he didn't see any traces of a great battle. At this time, all the traces had long been swept clean by Xiao Dou, so how could he still find any clues? Xiao Hua hurriedly withdrew his divine sense and released his Buddhist sense. His Buddhist sense was released for a distance of over 200 miles, and Xiao Hua finally saw some Dao sect disciples fleeing in panic. This is bad. Sure enough, the battle has started. Xiao Hua suddenly realized. This young master's wife is still there. Thinking about this, Xiao Hua's body flourished with sword light. The heart sword standing in midair let out a sword cry and transformed into 2 flying swords, 7 sword pills, and a sword gourd. At the same time that the sword origin returned to his body, Xiao Hua also stored the dream executioner, mountain splitter, and the 7 sword pills into his Buddhist fire. As for the sword gourd, it was stored into the space. After that, Xiao Hua activated the seeing cauldron once more and retrieved the damaged Brahma gold grand array. At the eye of the array, 6 fist-sized metal essence orbs were revealed. The Brahma gold grand array was built on the foundation of these 5 metal essence orbs. If it was in the past, Xiao Hua would definitely be happy, but at this time, he only glanced at it and stored it into the space. After Xiao Hua stored away the Buddha Sarira, his gaze once again fell on the mysterious Xiao Dou. The Xiao Dou was still absorbing spiritual energy of heaven and earth, but this spiritual energy was no longer the same as before. It seemed that because it had absorbed enough, or because other than the sword intent, sword energy, and metal essence of heaven and earth in the sword tomb, other spiritual energy of heaven and earth was useless to the Xiao Dou, so the Xiao Dou's absorption of spiritual energy of heaven and earth was much weaker, far less shocking than before. Xiao Hua was somewhat hesitant. Although the momentum had been greatly reduced, the vortex still existed. Xiao Hua was afraid that he would once again fall into the same dangerous situation as before. If so, wouldn't Xiao Hua be looking for trouble for himself? However, if he didn't store away this Xiao Dou, how could Xiao Hua be willing? Even if Xiao Hua didn't know the power of this Xiao Dou, since it had fallen into his hands, he was unwilling to throw it away. Now that he knew that this object was extraordinary, Xiao Hua was even more unwilling to throw it away. "Oh, not good! It seems like there are disciples of the Huan Hua sect." Xiao Hua's Buddhist sense had been outside all this time. When he saw that there were actually disciples of the Huan Hua sect being chased by swordsmen, he couldn't help but feel anxious. He clenched his teeth and urged the Imperial Thunder Travel to fly towards the Xiao Dou. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The sound of a thunderstorm was suddenly heard. It was even louder than the previous Imperial Thunder Travel. -11. Chapter 2695. Imperial Thunder Transformation. Xiao Hua only had a flash of thought in his mind when he instantly flew below Small Dou. Xiao Hua did not even need to raise his hand. As his figure flashed below Small Dou, his mind wrapped around it, and Small Dou was sucked into the space. Boom! Countless amounts of world spirit chi followed the inertia and smashed towards the place where Little Dou disappeared. The enormous force was extremely surging as it directly smashed into the ground. A deep pit that was several tens of feet in size instantly appeared. The soil and dust rose high into the air as countless amounts of world spirit chi continued to rush over. Wave after wave of impact rippled and dispersed into the distance. However, this rapid rippling impact could not catch up to Xiao Hua's figure. Xiao Hua's cheerful laughter scattered across the sky. "What is going on? Since the inner cores of the male and female lightning beasts have disappeared, how did my lightning escape technique advance again?" Xiao Hua kept Small Dou. His heart was carefree and bewildered. "Perhaps it has something to do with the tempering of my physical body?" However, just as Xiao Hua thought of this, anger appeared on his face again. He roared like spring thunder. "Who dares to hurt my Tao?" At this point, Xiao Hua realized that this was Li Zongbao's catchphrase. He hurriedly shut his mouth. Thunder rumbled under his feet and his figure suddenly sped up. He did not want to use the lightning escape technique, but in the battle between the sword cultivators and the Dao sect, Fairy Hong Xia, Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao were already in a predicament. How could he dare to conceal it? "Which bastard dares to hurt my Imperial Thunder sect disciple?" Xiao Hua was helpless as he hastily changed his mantra. He used the two secret techniques of stealing the sky, swapping the sun, and crossing the sea by deception. He also took the opportunity to change his Taoist robe and quickly flew forward. As for the location of the spirit-devouring Great Array, because the sword tomb no longer existed, the place where the sword cultivators and the Dao sect confronted each other was still a little turbulent. However, it was already very different from before. Even Xiao Hua could keep Small Dou in such a situation. LV Ruochang, Hung Li and the rest could naturally fight to the death. Seeing the sky gradually disappear, LV Ruochang saw the outcome she had predicted. Although she was shocked by the disappearance of the sword tomb, she was more concerned about killing the Dao sect cultivators. The sword mound was nothing more than a product of the great war of Dao and sword. If this sword mound was gone, another sword mound would definitely appear. As long as they killed these hundreds of thousands of cultivators, the existence of the sword mound would be meaningless. Therefore, as soon as the suction force of the small battle weakened slightly, LV Ruochang personally took action. He urged the sword light to fight with Henghen, and the hundreds of thousands of sword cultivators surrounded the hundreds of thousands of cultivators, ready to kill them one by one. Li Zongbao, Xiao Mao and Fairy Hong Xiao were all in a critical situation. The three of them had been injured earlier, but after consuming the pills refined by Xiao Hua, their injuries had improved greatly. However, during this period of time, the spiritual qi of heaven and earth had changed, making it impossible for them to cultivate in peace. They had to constantly deal with the harassment of sword cultivators, causing their injuries to drag on and unable to fully recover. This was especially so for Fairy Hong Xia. Her phoenix celestial body had been severely injured by the 5 elemental sword qi, and she could no longer summon it. She could only use the Kane true water to protect herself, Xiao Mao and Li Zongbao. Xiao Mao was only in the middle foundation establishment stage, and his dermic powers had long been depleted. Fortunately, he cultivated the dragonization ability, and when his spiritual qi recovered, he could extract spiritual qi much faster than others. This was why he could fight with Fairy Hong Xia. As for Li Zongbao, who had the highest cultivation, now that his immortal piercing whip had been destroyed, he no longer had a suitable dermic treasure. Most of his mystique was on the immortal piercing whip, and without it, he was really restricted. He could not even compare to Xiao Mao. Clang, LV Ruochang's sword light shot into the sky, and the sound of the sword humming could be heard. The phoenix sword will flew out from her body and rushed towards Heng Heng. Heng Heng's face was equally gloomy. He pointed his finger, and the talisman in his nascent soul hand flashed with a faint light, and grabbed at the phoenix sword will. Heng Heng's mood was the complete opposite of LV Ruochang's. He originally wanted to take advantage of the changes in the sword catacomb to find a flaw in the sword cultivators so that he could lead his disciples to escape from the sword formation. But under LV Ruochang's command, the sword cultivator disciples had a tight defense and were impregnable. After several days of stalemate, there was no gap at all. Seeing that the spiritual qi of heaven and earth had become the same as outside the sword catacomb, Heng Heng's heart sank again. Left with no choice, he could only order the Taoist disciples to fight against the sword cultivators, and he himself took out his talisman. If Heng Heng and the others' talismans were normal, they would naturally be able to deal with LV Ruochang and the other third-grade illusory swordsmen. But in the spirit-devouring array, these talismans had been devoured by the spirit-devouring bugs and had been damaged. Now, they were definitely insufficient to deal with the enemy swordsmen. After the first contact between the cultivators and the swordsmen after the changes, the cultivators were immediately at a disadvantage. But as the cultivators fought, they tried their best to break out of the encirclement towards the west. On one hand, there were disciples guarding the 10-direction annihilation array there. On the other hand, they were still hoping that the nascent soul stage elder who caused the changes in the sword catacomb would suddenly appear. However, after fighting for another half a day, tens of thousands of cultivators were killed. The remaining 100,000 cultivators were exhausted and their morale was low. Their morale was in stark contrast to the hundreds of thousands of swordsmen. Hung Feng and the others were in despair. Roar! It sounded like a dragon's roar was coming from afar, but it was much softer when it reached this place. But everyone heard it. Humph! Don't think about the nascent soul stage elder. Didn't you hear it? This is the roar of a strange beast, not the nascent soul stage elder of your Taoist sect. LV Ruochang's phoenix sword essence was once again crushed by Heng Heng's nascent soul stage elder. Seeing Heng Heng involuntarily look towards the west, LV Ruochang sneered. Even if you have a nascent soul stage elder helping you, do you think we sword cultivators don't have a sword transformation stage elder? Don't forget, when we first entered the sword catacomb, the sword transformation stage elder's sword essence was also there. See, that's right. Heng Heng's face turned ashen when LV Ruochang saw through his thoughts. That's right. How could a nascent soul stage cultivator compare to a sword transformation stage elder? Even if this nascent soul stage cultivator was willing to help, would he dare to? Are you really going to kill every single one of my cultivators? Hing Yao looked sadly at the cultivators who were fighting hard, especially his own disciples. Under the siege of more than 10 grade 6 bright sword swordsmen and 2 grade 1 illusory sword swordsmen, Fairy Hong Xia, Xiao Mao and Li Zongbao were already in a perilous situation. If not for Fairy Hong Xia's innate primordial water, and if not for the fact that these swordsmen were greedy for the innate primordial water, the 3 of them would have died long ago. What? LV Ruochang sneered. Didn't you all have the same thought when you were in the Golden Destruction Formation? If we were in a different situation, would you let the sword domain elders go? Hun Hun gritted his teeth and said fiercely, I don't know if I can be as ruthless as you. However, I know that where it is possible to make mistakes, one should spare them. Even if I fall today, there will come a day when you will be forced into such a desperate situation by my Dao sect's disciples. Ha! All right, I will wait for that day to come. LV Ruochang laughed and threw away his previous coldness. I'm afraid you will never see that day in your life. At this moment, in the western sky, rolling thunder sounded from afar. The sound of thunder was like the beating of a war drum, crushing the courage of the sword cultivators. It's finally here! Hung Hung was delighted. A nascent soul stage cultivator's aura came from afar, slowly pushing towards them. However, this aura was a little strange. It only flashed across the sword formation before it was retracted. Then, an angry roar sounded. Which bastard dares to hurt my Imperial Thunder Sect disciples? This voice was like a clap of thunder, shaking the hearts of hundreds of thousands of sword cultivators. They could not help but quietly retract their sword light. LV Ruochang felt the aura of a nascent soul stage cultivator, and his expression turned cold. He gritted his teeth, and the phoenix sword intent that was about to charge towards Heng Hung also stopped in midair. He looked up into the distance. In the distant horizon, where the thunder was rumbling, a powerful divine sense swept over. At the same time, a short figure flew into everyone's vision at a speed faster than rainbow transformation. Senior Brother Nameless? Seeing Xiao Hua's appearance after his transformation, Mingyu was the first to cover her mouth and exclaim, Ah! The second to be shocked was Fairy Hong Xia. For a moment, she did not understand. Was this Nameless the real Nameless or Xiao Hua's Nameless in disguise? After all, this was the nascent soul stage Nameless. Xiao Hua was far from the nascent soul stage, right? However, although Xiao Hua's spiritual will had undergone a huge change after condensing his core, there was still a trace of familiarity within it. Furthermore, when Xiao Hua had arrived at the scene, he had looked at her with concern. Fairy Hong Xia immediately understood. This nascent soul stage senior was none other than her lover, Xiao Hua. Senior Brother Nameless. Han Heng naturally knew Nameless' name. Seeing the rumbling thunder, how could she not know that this was Nameless? She hurriedly called out. But after calling out, she realized that this was Nameless after his pregnancy. He was her senior, so she immediately changed her greeting. Disciple Hung Heng greets Senior Nameless. De Sun, Xiong Hua Song and the other surviving Golden Core stage cultivators all bowed and greeted Senior Nameless. Xiao Hua was very pleased with himself. However, he did not really fly close to the battle. Instead, he stood far away in the sky and waved his hand. You all wait! Then, his gaze swept across the entire battlefield. He frowned and said coldly, You all are actually fighting in the Sword Tomb? My Dao sect disciples, other than those from the west, are there only so many left? What about Qian Mo? Senior Nameless should know that Qian Mo had already fallen before coming to the Sword Tomb. Yuan Zhongyu immediately bowed and said, That day, Qian Mo followed me to the clear cave and was forced to self-destruct by this swordsman Lu Ruochang. And, if not for Qian Mo's sacrifice, I'm afraid all of us would have fallen into Lu Ruochang's trap. -11. Chapter 2696. Qian Mo is dead? Xiao Hua was slightly taken aback, and the image of that righteous golden core cultivator appeared in his mind. That's right, it's LV Ruochang's trap, Heng Ju hurriedly said. She pretended to be weak outside the sword catacomb, and lured our cultivators into the sword catacomb. Furthermore, she set up the yin-yang sword formation, the five elements sword formation, the spirit-devouring formation, and even a soul cultivator formation. She wanted to exterminate hundreds of thousands of our disciples. Exterminate? Xiao Hua really didn't expect LV Ruochang to have so many tricks up her sleeves. Before he participated in the battle, she set up such a huge trap. If he didn't condense his core in the sword catacomb, perhaps, not only him, but also Fairy Hong Xia, Li Zongbao, Xiao Mao, and all the other Dao sect disciples would have died in the sword catacomb. Seeing Xiao Hua frown, Hung Ming hurriedly bowed and said, "Fortunately, Senior Wu Ming's pregnant celestial phenomenon broke the sword cultivators' battle and saved our 100,000 disciples. Disciple Hung Ming brings the 100,000 disciples who survived to thank Senior for his great kindness." All the disciples bowed in unison, saying, "Thank you, Senior Nameless, for your kindness." Obviously, Hung Ju was afraid that Nameless wouldn't make a move, and wanted to use this righteousness, using the lives of the 100,000 disciples to ask Nameless to make a move. However, Nameless was Xiao Hua, and he came to make a move. How could he not make a move? However, how to make a move was another problem for Xiao Hua. "You are Elvira Chang?" Xiao Hua's gaze fell on the female swordsman opposite Hung Ju, who had already regained her indifference. "Junior Elvira Chang greets Nascent Soul Senior." Elvira Chang's tone was cold, but her etiquette was considerate. She bowed and said, "Junior has already heard of Senior's name. Many thanks to Senior for sparing our lives in the Seven Extremes Mountains. Junior Elvira." The other third-grade illusory swordsmen were extremely unwilling, but they also bowed helplessly. This helplessness was the same as when Xiao Hua bowed when he saw the swordsman near the Yin-Yang Twin Springs mountain. "And you can wait." Xiao Hua waved his hand. "I understand what you mean by waiting. This old man didn't participate in the battle, and now I'm a nascent soul senior, so it's not suitable for me to participate in your battle." Hung Ju's heart grew anxious as he silently complained about how the Imperial Thunder sect was as pedantic as GNMO. He wanted to say something. In fact, Xiao Hua's heart was also full of discomfort. Concealing one's cultivation level and being a foundation establishment cultivator, one could really run amok. But how could he be so restrained after acting like a nascent soul senior? "However, do you think that I can just stand by and watch as 100,000 Dao sect disciples die in your ambush?" Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and said, "Not to mention that this old man is unable to face the master of the Imperial Thunder sect, I'm afraid that this old man's future cultivation will also have inner demons. Senior, if you want to interfere, then do your best." Lu Ruocheng said coldly. "Senior, you are not the only nascent soul cultivator here. There are also sword transformation masters in our sword domain." "Oh?" Xiao Hua sneered. "Are you threatening this old man?" "It's not a threat, it's a fact." Lu Ruocheng wasn't afraid at all. "Since Senior didn't participate in the battle, don't worry too much about it. Your Dao sect's cultivators actually talked about the loss of your sect, but what about the loss of my sword domain? Your Dao sect's cultivators set up the 10-direction annihilation formation in the sword tomb. Didn't they also lure my sword cultivators into an ambush? Didn't they also kill hundreds of thousands of my swordsmen?" "Oh? There's such a thing?" Xiao Hua immediately understood the reason why he saw the disciples of the various sects earlier. "In short, this is not the time for Nascent Soul Senior and Sword Transformation Senior to appear. And Senior is also not a gold core cultivator who is participating in the battle. Therefore, I hope that Senior can distinguish right from wrong and withdraw as soon as possible." Lu Ruocheng said word by word. "Otherwise, when Sword Transformation Senior of my sword domain arrives, it will be hard to say anything. How can there be any sword transformation masters in this sword tomb? If there are fallen Gold Mountain cultivators, there are still some." Xiao Hua secretly curled his lips. "Senior Nameless, don't listen to her nonsense." Xiong Huasong immediately shouted. "Before the swordsmen were ambushed, there was indeed a sword transformation master's sword intent at the place where Senior came from, but the swordsmen were killed. There was no trace of sword transformation Senior at all." "Oh, I understand." Xiao Hua naturally knew the cause of the matter. The sword transformation master's sword intent was definitely Zhang Yuhe's doing. This was what Xiao Hua saw that day. Therefore, Xiao Hua was even more certain that there was absolutely no sword transformation in this sword tomb. Nonsense, if there was a sword transformation in the sword tomb, how could Xiao Hua successfully condense his gold core? Or rather, if the sword transformation was in the sword tomb, could it escape the suction force of small dough? Lu Ruochang. Xiaohua raised his head and said coldly, "What do you think your sword transformation swordsmen can say when they see this old man? My sword domain's sword transformation senior, and Dao Sect's nascent soul senior are all seniors in our eyes. No matter if it's a war or a peaceful time, we disciples should respect them." Lu Ruochang said neither arrogantly nor humbly. As for what seniors say to each other, how would this junior know? Alas, the war between Dao sect and sword cultivators has already lasted for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. The number of swordsmen and cultivators that died in the sword tomb is also unknown. Among them, there is no lack of outstanding talents. If it weren't for the war, they would all be able to prove their Dao. Xiaohua sighed slightly and had the appearance of an expert. This old man won't talk about the advantages and disadvantages of the war. The 10-direction annihilation formation swordsmen suffered great losses. The 4-direction sword formation cultivators suffered great losses. Both sides can be considered even. After today, it will be the battlefield of the various senior brothers. You all should know when to stop. Lu Ruochang didn't give in and said indifferently, "My sword domain's sword transformation senior still hasn't appeared. This junior doesn't know if I can stop. Moreover, senior doesn't seem to be a Dao sect disciple participating in the war. You don't seem to have the qualifications to say these words, right?" Xiaohua frowned and felt very ashamed and angry in his heart. It wasn't that he didn't want to give this Lu Ruochang some color to see, or even take her life. However, he really didn't know what method to use. He didn't know what spell to use, what ability to not reveal his identity. Thinking for a moment, Xiaohua could only say again, "Right and wrong in the war between Dao cultivators and sword cultivators, no matter what is said, it's useless. You and I are the difference between friend and foe. So much, what's the use? This old man is asking you right now whether or not you can stop. It's useless." Lu Ruochang also said coldly, "This junior is only reminding senior that nascent soul cultivators and sword transformation cultivators are all seniors. You can't lower yourself to the same level as us juniors. If senior violates this rule, don't blame my sword domain's sword transformation cultivators for attacking foundation establishment and chi condensation cultivators for no reason. As for whether or not I should stop, this junior still has the same words. This junior doesn't have the qualifications to say that I should stop." Ha ha ha, Xiaohua raised his head and laughed heartily. He pointed his finger and said, "Don't say that there are over 300,000 swordsmen here. Do you think these swordsmen can be my match?" In fact, Lu Ruochang's thoughts were exactly as Xiaohua thought. She really wanted to use these 300,000 swordsmen to fight Xiaohua. She firmly believed that Xiaohua absolutely didn't dare, or perhaps disdained to do such a thing to the drawing sword swordsman. And she absolutely dared to use these 300,000 swordsmen to fight Xiaohua. However, Lu Ruochang said indifferently, "This junior doesn't dare to think like that. These sword cultivator disciples are just ants in senior's eyes. Senior only needs to stretch out a finger to pinch them to death. Everything depends on senior's thoughts." "Nonsense!" Xiaohua was somewhat displeased. He wasn't a nascent soul cultivator and didn't have the awareness and self-restraint of a nascent soul cultivator. He said coldly, "Tell me, my 600,000 disciples, will you release or not release? What if I don't release? What if I release?" Lu Ruochang also threw caution to the wind and said coldly. In fact, Heng Jiao and the others were already anxious. They even disapproved. Why would a nascent soul cultivator talk so much nonsense with illusory swordsmen? Just directly kill them. Although there were 300,000 swordsmen, even if a few escaped, would the Dao sect still admit that it was a nascent soul cultivator? They only needed to kill Lu Ruochang and the other illusory swordsmen. At this time, when they heard Lu Ruochang forcing Xiaohua into a dead end, they also looked at Xiaohua anxiously, as if they were waiting for Xiaohua's decision. "Damn it!" How could Xiaohua not know what these gold core cultivators meant? Not to mention that he wasn't a nascent soul cultivator. Even if he was, he still had to consider his own sect. If he killed all the illusory swordsmen, what would happen to the Imperial Thunder sect? How would Qian Lazy explain to the Huan country's sword cultivators? Release, naturally, it's good for you, it's good for me, it's good for everyone, Xiaohua said coldly. If you don't release, then you die. It's not good for me, it's not good for everyone. Xiaohua was also very ruthless. He now regretted wearing the Imperial Thunder sect's clothes and appearing as nameless. Then this junior would rather die. Lu Ruochang's face was pale. His slender eyelashes fluttered slightly, but his eyes were like the moon in the night sky. He stared at Xiaohua without the slightest fear. You are forcing me, Xiaohua said word by word. He slapped his forehead. He vaguely remembered the hand of the nascent soul cultivator in the ink-black forest. A huge hurricane appeared, and the surrounding heaven and earth spirit chi condensed around Xiaohua's body. That aura was not inferior to that of an ordinary nascent soul cultivator. Ever since Xiaohua created the Foundation Establishment cultivation method, his confidence skyrocketed. He believed that with his cultivation of the heaven and earth sleeve, he could definitely use the hand of the nascent soul. Even if there were any mistakes, he was just a nascent soul cultivator. What was so hard to explain? Seeing the heaven and earth spirit chi within 100 feet being absorbed by Xiaohua, Ruo Ling and the others' faces changed slightly. Heng Jiao and the others were also happy. As for Fairy Hong Xia, she was a little shocked. The heaven and earth spirit chi condensed rapidly. Xiaohua slightly spread his robe, and the power of imprisonment enveloped Lu Ruochang for 100 feet. A faint palm mixed with rocks and the others were already beginning to take shape. Senior Nameless, Ruo Ling said anxiously. The outcome of the battle has already been decided. Even if Senior kills Junior Sister Lu, what benefit will it bring to the battle? Besides, why should Senior lower himself to the same level as us? Senior, please stay your hand. -11. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.